It's going to be pretty close to 5.
It starts recording?
Yeah.
The radio.
So that way
starts
we
to
can
actually
eliminate
start
a lot of
recording.
questions
But
and
they
maybe
can
get more to
hear
the
us.
dialogue then.
Okay, so you can see that we are running as the time's going down.
Okay.
So we're
Chelsea, Tremblay connected.
Where am I now?
So Malika or Chelsea Tremblay or Dave Kinsinger on the line yet?
Let's see.
I'm here. Chelsea Tremblay, yes. I just announced her. The other presenter, no. I'll give you all the names that come in. Thank you. And right now we do have Todd Antigua connected as well.
Oh, it's like 11.
I
Oh,
know.
they're all, and then the 11:54.
I
And
know.
she's down here.
So see, it doesn't come in order. I know. That's why I have to look at the times.
So are you guys voting on the color code thing today?
No.
2 weeks from now. I think this is just presentation and then roll it out
David,
to the public
good connect.
and wait for comments, right?
Yes. Dave Kinsinger's on the line?
Yes, I am.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
I better turn my hearing aids up.
Oh, it's their presentation.
Can you hear me okay, Mark?
Yeah, you're booming in, Dave.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Yep, you bet. We'll start here in about a minute. Okay, it's 12 noon on December 7th, 2020. This is a regular Borough Assembly meeting.
Is she going to count him? Sorry.
Malika, can you count us down, please?
Certainly, thank you. And just reach a line when you're not speaking and have a great call. I'll give you the countdown. We'll begin in 5, 4, 3.
Okay, now we'll start the meeting. It's December 7th, 2020. This is a regular Borough Assembly meeting. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Jay,
Excused.
Taylor,
Excused.
Chelsea,
Here.
Mark,
Here.
Jeff,
Here.
Bob,
Here.
Dave.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum. We have 5 assembly members, 3 in the assembly chambers, and 2 calling in. It's now time for the voluntary Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
The flag of the United States of America. The republic for which it stands, one nation under God, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, that brings us to item 3. There are no minutes to be approved today, so we'll move on to item 4, amendment and approval of the meeting agenda. Are there any amendments proposed by assembly members today? Okay, all those in favor of moving forward with the agenda as presented, say aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we'll move forward. Item 5, public hearings. There's a public hearing on ordinance 2020-24, an ordinance adjusting the fiscal year 2021 budget for known changes. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to participate in this public hearing? No one in the queue for that, Debbie, or how do we tell?
Let me double check here. It does not look like it, Mayor Jensen.
Okay, if that's the case, the public hearing is now closed. There are no bid awards. That brings us to item 7, persons to be heard related to items on today's agenda. Clerk, will you please recognize the first caller, first testifier?
Yes, we have an in-person testifier in our Director Bell for Mountain View Manor. I would recognize her first, please.
Okay, Ms. Bell, you have the floor.
Thank you. My name is Sheila Bell, and I'm the Director of Petersburg Elderly Housing and Mountain View Assisted Living also. And I'm here to talk about PMC advocating for the asymptomatic testing at our facility at Assisted Living. As the Director of Mountain View Assisted Living, my number one priority is to protect my residents physically, emotionally, and provide a safe, caring environment. Since the hospital brought up the topic of asymptomatic testing, I felt it might be helpful to start out by explaining some of the differences between an assisted living facility and a hospital, long-term care facility, or a skilled nurse facility. The most important thing to remember first is the assisted living is considered a home. Imagine a grandma and a grandpa living in their home and what they would be able to do and decide on their own. Assisted living homes follow state regulations and participate in yearly inspections as well as bi-yearly inspections. A long-term care or skilled care facility is a medical facility that follows a totally different set of regulations and inspections than an assisted living home, and this would include Petersburg Medical Center. There are stark differences between an assisted living and a medical facility. For example, at a hospital or a long-term care facility, they only allow LPNs or RNs to pass medications. Assisted livings are allowed to have resident assistants and CNAs pass the medications after completing medication training. Hospitals and long-term care facilities have RNs, but with assisted living, this is optional. It's not required at all by the state. At assisted living, it's about residents' choice. We can encourage them to make good choices with food, sleep, activities, and otherwise, but the choice is the residents, or in some cases, the power of attorney, depending on their mental status. At assisted living, we are under one roof. Again, we are a home. Assisted livings can provide end-of-life care for a resident if the resident POA and the doctor are in agreement, but we cannot advertise this. Again, it's the resident's choice, even unto death. Our license is under the state of Alaska, and we have all the inspections that the state requires for us to operate under a license, such as DEC, elevator, state ombudsman, fire sprinkler, and otherwise. We care for our residents under the assisted living state regulations, and I have a licensing specialist that I have been working with for approximately 7 years. He's the one that comes to our facility for our state inspections. He goes through every inch of our facility, including staff files, resident files, physical inspections for the facility, including all rooms, policies, procedures, and all reporting. When I was first approached about the asymptomatic testing last spring by PMC, I asked all residents and the powers of attorney if they were unable to make their own decisions, if they would like to be tested. 6 out of 22 of the residents said yes, and out of 23 staff members, there were 6 volunteers. We have been asked since to participate in the testing, but because we are a home, we can only ask for volunteers. Since that time, after reminders, no residents have wanted to participate, and the powers of attorney, or either the powers of attorney, at any time, they know that I would be happy to accommodate their loved ones for testing, and I would set it up. So far, there's been no takers. Staff has not been interested since that first time, even with my encouragement, until about 2 weeks ago when I gave them a pep talk about how it might be helpful. I had 2 people sign up, staff members. There's a sign-up sheet on my desk in my office at all times for staff to sign up for the testing, and I will help set it up. Please understand we test residents and staff who have traveled, although this is a rare occurrence. We have a very strict sick leave policy at the manor that requires staff to test if they have any COVID-like symptoms, and they are not allowed to return to work until they have had a negative COVID test and have gone 24 hours with no symptoms. While asymptomatic testing for staff seems like a good option, after talking to my state licensing specialist and other assisted living homes around the state, I'm not convinced. He helped ease the conflict I was experiencing. I was torn between the idea of protecting my residents with the staff testing and also the knowledge that I might lose valuable employees if the testing became mandatory. As many employees have told me all along, if testing becomes mandatory, other than travel or sickness, they will leave the manor. This could include up to 5 senior employees. Many of them have various concerns about the testing. If these employees leave, even half of them, it would be incredibly devastating to the facility. Nobody but us understands how hard this year has been on the residents, especially during our lockdown, which lasted until mid-August. Even with the best of intentions, a lockdown becomes abuse, according to many experts. Since we have reopened, I have had residents who are thinking clearly say that they would rather die than not be able to see their loved ones again. When there's any new cases in town, those panic, and they need to hear that we're not going to lock down again. It's the same residents every time with each new case. The loss of staff would have a very negative effect. Okay, and so recently I reached out to, I'm so sorry that this is going so fast, but my state licensing guy, I have testimony from all the assisted livings too that I wanted to read, so that's unfortunate. But anyways, to sum it all up, my licensing guy says that we would be better off not to shut down the facility or not to do the testing at all because it's going to be detrimental, and he said that the main reasons are that, they just, I'm so sorry that happened that way because I had so much good stuff to say.
You could continue, Sheila.
Can I really?
I think we should hear your full.
I would so appreciate it. I didn't realize. Okay, thank you very much for that. I recently reached out to 3 facilities in Alaska to inquire what they are doing regarding the asymptomatic testing. I talked to an administrator in Southeast Alaska regarding the asymptomatic testing, and she said that they were not doing it. She said they presented the idea to the staff, and one person quit due to just the possibility of it happening. She dropped the idea because of the value of this employee and the loss it would bring to the residents. They're a 10-bed facility and have had no COVID in their facility. I also talked to a director of a skilled nursing facility in Juneau. She said that they are federal and they have to participate in the asymptomatic testing weekly. The biggest drawback was the false positive. She understands the idea, but also stated that she understands the tests are not 100% accurate. Since March, they had 6 staff members test positive at different times throughout the pandemic. Each time the turnaround of the test was between 4 hours and multiple days. When they received the positive results, the staff members in all cases had already been in close contact with the residents. She also went on to explain that everyone pushes the panic button. You go into lockdown, test all the residents, all the staff, and the stress level goes through the roof. She claimed that in every instance, it literally took weeks to get through it, and it was awful. She understands the concept of it, but if she could choose, she would not do it. And in all 6 cases at this facility, not one resident got it, and there was no spread between coworkers. She said she truly believes they were all false positives, and if she had the option to do it or not to do it, she would not. They're a 57-plus bed facility and no COVID to date for the residents. I also talked to an assisted living director out of Anchorage, and they have 10 residents. She told me that they do not do mandatory asymptomatic testing on staff. Not all staff want to participate, and most said that they would leave work at the facility if it wasn't required, or if it became mandatory. She said it's usually the same 3 employees that test. So far, there's been no COVID at their facility, and she also mentioned that it didn't matter much as the turnaround time with those tests is days, and by then the possible exposures already happened. When I talked to my licensing specialist who lives in Anchorage, I also shared my concerns with him about the incidence of false positives and what this could do to the facility. He agreed that not only the false positives were possible, but they were probable. I explained that I want to do my very best at the facility to protect my residents, but I'm afraid I'll be found uncaring, irresponsible, derelict of my duties, and my main concerns are losing 1/3 of my staff or having a false positive or multiple ones. He said, look, you can't stop this through asymptomatic testing. If you want to do the safest thing for your residents, the best thing you can do to protect them is to never let them leave the facility. Keep all employees locked up in the building with them and have supplies delivered and stay like that till the pandemic is over. He also went on to say, of course, this is unreasonable, but he said the point is you cannot stop this. You need to take every precaution possible, but it is what it is. He said he believes it would be worse to lose staff that would not easily be replaced than it would be to get COVID in our facility. I also asked if he knew any statistics on how the disease usually enters the assisted living facilities at the state, and he said it's the hospitals. He said he didn't have the numbers, but what his experience has shown him, it is brought in from staff from the hospitals to the assisted living homes through home health provided by the hospitals or hospital staff that also works at an assisted living home. He told me to do my best and recommended the following. Consider wearing masks. The state does not require us to wear masks in assisted living homes. I told him it was a borough policy and we've done it since the beginning. He went on to say that we could take staff temperatures, do survey questions, resident temps, screening of visitors, temperatures of visitors, but again, we don't have to. It's a recommendation. I told him we've been doing all those things at the very beginning. My employees hustle every day, sometimes under challenging circumstances with a mask on their entire shift, to the detriment of their own health at times. I explained we have extreme hand washing, sanitizing high-touch areas throughout the day, and have a strict sick leave policy. He said we are doing above and beyond what our license would ever require. He was encouraged to hear, like other small towns, we have a very low number of cases. He recommended we keep doing what we're doing and remain diligent as we are doing a good job. He encouraged me to have the hospital CEO, EOC members, borough manager, borough lawyer to call him if any questions at all. He recommended that we keep doing what we're doing and remain diligent. He also said specifically that if the state felt it was necessary and in the best interest of the residents, they would require this asymptomatic testing of the staff. I've been told that Mountain View Manor is a weak spot in this town regarding the pandemic, and due to some recent conversations I've had, I want to mention here that if somebody has told you anything different regarding what precautions we are taking at the manor, they're either ignorant of our policies or are making things up. Please encourage them to call me, as I would be happy to explain and answer any questions that they might have. False information plants seeds of doubt in people's minds, and it needs to stop. I also want to make it clear that we are not in lockdown. Our residents have been free to leave since mid-August to come and go as they please. They can visit with loved ones, go to the store, go shopping, and have visitors in and out according to our mitigation plan. And in closing, thank you for the extra time. I hope this clarifies the difference between an assisted living home, a skilled nursing facility, and a long-term care as far as regulations and requirements go. What is required of us by the state as far as our operations, and what is allowed and recommended by my licensing specialist. Thankfully, we have no cases at our facility. It is very clear from the testing data there are indeed false results. The tests are not 100% accurate. In fact, they're way below that. The test results don't return in a timely manner, likely to be a benefit. We've had no hospitalizations in our town due to COVID and no community spread. I believe you would be putting us at greater risk by mandating the asymptomatic testing. The loss of staff would be incredibly detrimental to our facility. The chaos from one false positive would be a traumatic event for all. And the biggest risk, according to what my licensing specialist has seen around the state, is the hospital staff coming into our facility. And a side note is that my licensing specialist lost his grandma to COVID, so he knows how devastating it can be. And it's important to mention that we're thankful for Petersburg Medical Center and this offer of this service. It is not what is best for our facility. It's been a tough year, and as always, just as Grandma and Grandpa would go to PMC for medical care, so do we rely on them for our residents' continued care. Please vote against this. Let us continue doing what we've been doing all these months. Also, please remember the state does not require or recommend this. And if it goes through, where does it stop? Does this mean that PMC will go again to the borough or the EOC to try to get us to have other mandates on our staff, like the flu vaccine, the COVID vaccine, a lockdown, resident testing? These things are all a matter of choice, none of which the state is requiring. Where does it stop? Remember, we're a home. We are not a medical facility, and we care more about our residents than any other people except their loved ones. Thank you for the time.
Okay, thank you for your input there. Any questions of Sheila while she's available? Member Michi?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I mean, I have several questions, but, I am not sure how best way to handle this conversation, because I'd like to hear from Phil and Carl as we go down this path. There were several things that were said during that testimony that, I'm trying to wrap my head around, and I'm hoping Sheila can stay here so we can at least have some type of dialogue and try and sort out some of the concerns that I have. I was kind of writing things down as we went, but I think I would probably have some more questions regarding this testing, this asymptomatic testing of Mountain View Manor, after I've heard from both Phil and Carl about some of their thoughts as well.
Mr. Mayor?
Okay, well, possibly this should have been in a different section on the agenda, but I don't know how we just, I guess we could visit it after report of other officers. If Sheila can stay till then, maybe that's where Sheila should have given her testimony.
Or under the agenda item, Mayor Jensen, when you guys are discussing, that's really where I thought it would go.
Well, at that point, it's pretty general that we just debate it as an assembly and don't ask questions. So maybe if we get all the information before that, and
Sure.
Member Michi has a point, maybe if Sheila could stay, and we could ask questions of all three that are presenting on this topic, Mr. Hagerman, Mr. Hofstetter, and Sheila, if you can.
Mr. Mayor, I'd be happy to stay as long as.
Okay, thank you. So let's, if there's no specific questions now for Sheila, maybe we'll address it after report of other officers, if that makes sense. So Thank you, Sheila, again. And Clerk Thompson, will you please unmute the next caller with views related to items on today's agenda?
Yes, thank you. Malika, if you could please unmute Brittany Collum.
The line is unmuted now.
Hi, Brittany. We will be adhering to a 5-minute time here.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. For a little bit of a delay, sorry. I am calling in regards to the asymptomatic testing, mainly for, I guess, Mountain Manor, and it looks like it's possibly heading to the school. My concern is, I guess, several things. We have seen a turn in the town once the mask mandate went through. And prior to that, I feel that the town was doing great as far as cases and that kind of risk goes. And since the mask mandate went through, it seems that everyone's not at each other's throats, but getting close. Just it's caused a lot of derision in the town. And with the asymptomatic testing, I guess I feel it's another outreach or overreach, I guess I'd say, of the borough and also of the hospital at this point. They're kind of driving this wagon in a direction that makes me very wary because, again, it's causing a lot of issues in the town, and really it wasn't necessary, it doesn't seem. And with the asymptomatic testing, I fear that it's not going to stop with the hospital, or with the manor, it's not going to stop with the school. Pretty soon it's going to stretch to the citizens, and I just feel that it's time that the hospital and the borough kind of let things be. The manor has taken great care of their people. The school seems to have a good system in place, and I just don't think the results of the tests have shown to be very accurate. 45 cycles has been said, even by Fauci. That's too many times to be sending these tests, and so the results are not accurate. And hopefully this is making sense, but I'm just concerned that we're just kind of going in the same direction as the mask mandate, even further, where this is just going to cause more issues. And I don't think it's a good idea. So thank you for taking my call, and hope you guys listen to all the information that's presented, and just let everyone be the town and the manor, and just let everyone continue as they've been, because it seems to have been going just fine. So thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Clerk Thompson, will you please have the Malika unmute the next caller?
Yes, Malika, please unmute Teresa Phillips.
One moment, please. Hello. It's open.
Hello?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, you can.
So I'm going to be presenting a letter, and it's got some bullet points, so I'll get started.
Okay, 5 minutes.
To whom it may concern. Thank you. This letter has been written on behalf of Petersburg Mountain View Manor employees and is in regards to the asymptomatic testing mandate that was proposed on 11/30/2020. We, the undersigned, are opposed to this mandate for the following reasons. There's 7 bullet points. 1, we are not required by state licensing to complete any asymptomatic testing, and if it's not state required, why is it being considered here? 2, we have already taken every precaution necessary to minimize this, including but not limited to daily temperature checks, completing a daily symptom and exposure-related questionnaire, wearing a mask for the duration of our shift, excessive hand washing, social distancing outside of work, travel restrictions, and more. If any staff member is exhibiting any listed symptoms, including extremely common ailments like headaches and a runny nose or diarrhea, the staff member is immediately sent home and they have to have a negative COVID test to return back to work. In addition, any visitors that have to go through a screening procedure to enter the building per our reopening plan. We absolutely love our residents, and we are committed to keeping them safe and healthy. We feel that these precautions have worked very well at keeping them safe over the past 10 months, even during times where Petersburg was experiencing multiple cases at once. 3, we have had 0 COVID hospitalizations and minimal cases over the past year, with most cases being travel-related and not affiliated with community spread, asymptomatic or not. Considering this fact, paired with the precautions already being taken, we feel that the risk of exposure is rather low and the asymptomatic testing is unneeded. Number 4, the turnaround for test results is taking so long it is absolutely pointless for people who continue to work while waiting for results. It's no secret that some people in Petersburg are waiting up to 2 weeks to receive test results due to the magnitude of testing being done. So stopping early transmission is the goal here. Asymptomatic testing being completed every week but taking more than a week to receive results is asinine. One could argue that it takes less time to recover from COVID than it takes to receive your test result back. Number 5, the PCR test has the potential to detect not only live virus, but also genetic fragments that are left over from previous infection, which pose no risk. The PCR test by nature amplifies and duplicates small segments of DNA in cycles. Most tests set a limit of cycles at 37 to 40 because it can be argued that the cycle past this point is detecting genetic fragments that pose no risk of transmission. To detect a positive COVID case at PMC, however, samples are ran for 45 cycles. Director of Infectious Diseases, Dr. Anthony Fauci, stated that if somebody does come in within a cycle value of 37, 38, or even 36, it's just dead nucleotides. So why is the cycle cutoff at PMC 5 cycles above what is recommended for testing for this disease? Does that not cause inaccurate results and possible false positives, which has the potential to inflate case numbers? Number 6. Unneeded testing has the potential to gravely impact our staffing. False positives from inaccurate data procurement will cause unneeded quarantines and, in turn, will put dramatic pressure on the facility as a whole. The lack of available staff members will amplify the burnout of existing staff members. Any staff member who tests positive has the potential to be out for weeks at a time, considering they will be forced to wait for a negative test, and testing turnaround is anywhere from 3 to 14 days. The threat of reduced staffing is all based on this form of testing and subsequent contact tracing. Number 7. The World Health Organization came forward back in June, and they stated publicly that asymptomatic spread is rare. Chief Technical Lead Maria Van Kerkhove said that while it can happen, asymptomatic spread is unlikely to be the major driver of clusters or community transmission of infection. So why test anyone who has no connection to symptoms or sickness when so many other precautions are already being taken? In closing, our biggest concern is potential lockdowns that will have a negative effect on the mental and emotional health of our residents. This is a very, very hard year for them not being allowed to see family, and some not understanding why. Some felt very lonely, some felt abandoned. We have spent days and months and years of our lives caring for our residents, and we have fostered these relationships that are built on love, compassion, trust, and complete and total care. Unfortunately, proceeding with this mandate will force many of our employees to make a very hard personal decision in continuing to care for our residents at Mount Juliana. Please genuinely consider our concerns and the actual need of asymptomatic testing. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony. Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Malika, please unmute Becky Knight.
One moment, please. Line is open.
Hi, my name is Becky Knight, and I'm here to speak to you regarding Senator Murkowski's so-called landless legislation. While I continue to respect the deep cultural ties of Alaska Native people to the lands of Southeast Alaska, the premise for this bill is flawed. Various agency officials, including the Department of Agriculture Undersecretary, Department of Interior Assistant Secretary, and Department of Indian Affairs Director, wrote and testified before Congress in 1996 and 2015 regarding very similar versions of this bill. Accordingly, they reiterated that natives in the 5 communities of Tenakee, Petersburg, Wrangell, Ketchikan, and Haines were found ineligible for village status because they failed to meet the ANGSA criteria for eligibility. This was not an oversight or an inadvertent omission. It was informed, considered, and an intentional determination made under ANGSA. I sent you the statements on November 16th, which contain far more detail to support the determination than I can summarize in my 5 short minutes here. It is notable that these high-level agency officials expressed deep concerns that opening up so-called landless native claims could create a Pandora's box of other Alaska Native claims, upending ANGSA and setting up a perpetual effort to achieve total parity among all villages in the state. It would be reckless to do so. The ANGSA criteria for village eligibility were 3 criteria. Number 1, 25 or more natives were village residents on the 1970 census. Number 2, the village was not modern or urban in character. And number 3, the majority of the residents were native. Instead of village status, natives from these communities were enrolled as at-large shareholders of Sealaska and receive other benefits that natives with village status do not. For instance, they receive regular Access 7I financial distributions beyond that of village shareholders. The urban at-large shareholders for the spring 2020 and fall 2020 Sealaska shareholder distributions were just over $1,300 and $1,200 respectively, while village shareholders received far less at $332 and $398 respectively. In fact, ICER's, and that's the Institute of Social and Economic Research, ICER's Director Lee Gorsuch wrote in his December 7, 1993 letter to KFSK reporter Amy Miller to correct the record regarding her inaccurate news story, and this is a quote, "We did not, as you report, make a finding that Congress has inadvertently omitted to study villages from land benefits, nor did we recommend that Congress should now award them land. We did not, as you imply, say that the study villages were entitled to the same economic benefits as Southeast Alaska communities which village or urban corporations have received." Finally, during deliberations for the 2014 Sealaska bill, Senator Murkowski, on a Petersburg campaign stop, took questions on a variety of topics. Inevitably, her 70,000-acre 2014 Sealaska carve-out from the Tongass came up for discussion. One member of the public remarked, quote, "Much of Southeast Alaska's residents can't help but feel being played as hostages and political pawns in this legislation." Senator Murkowski responded that she, quote, "truly regrets the anxiety and tension that the Sealaska bill has created in our small towns, and recognized that the legislation, quote, pitted neighbor against neighbor, and that, quote, the resentment is not good for communities." Those are her words. In fact, in a press release the day the Sealaska legislation passed, she declared, quote, "Some 43 years after passage of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, the federal government will finally finish paying the debt we owe natives for the settlement of their Aboriginal land claims." Yet very shortly after that press release, she introduced a similar version of this bill, and now this latest version. Murkowski's definition of a final clearly depends on her political whim to provide timber to the export timber industry in Southeast Alaska, which is what this legislation is about. The regret she expressed about the impacts to small communities of her continual land grabs and resource exploitation was short-lived and insincere. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you for your testimony. Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Malika, please unmute Chris Noros, please.
One moment, please. Line is open.
Are you there, Chris?
Mr. Norris, your line is open. Please check your mute functions or pick up your handset. We're unable to hear you.
Malika, maybe we will move on to the next caller and then try to get back with Ms. Norris.
It shows she's on and she's unmuted, but for some reason we just can't hear her.
Can you, I guess it doesn't matter if you could hear us or not, we can't hear you, Chris, so maybe we should move on to the next caller and then maybe have her call back in and we'll see if that clears up the problem.
Okay, Malika, if you could please unmute Jessica Ray.
One moment, please. The line is open now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I am calling in regards to the asymptomatic testing mandate that you are voting on today. My name is Jessica Ray, and I work as a residential assistant at Mountain View Manor. I am urging you to not pass this mandate to Texas. This will negatively impact not just us as workers, but as residents first and foremost.
Jessica?
The relationship with our residents, and asymptomatic testing will hinder them. I
I have watched as we went into lockdown when they couldn't have visitors. It gravely affected them. Some of them felt abandoned. Some were confused. They would repeatedly ask why none of their family members would come to see them anymore. We lost a couple during the lockdown. I watched a pastor get turned away from being able to come in and pray over the dying person's family. I watched while other residents weren't able to get the care they needed because of the regulations that have been set in place. I've seen more suffering from all other sides besides COVID sicknesses. Yet we have kept to the rules. This has been on for months. We have masked up, not as hard. Most of the residents have trouble hearing and only lip read. The masking has already been a huge deal to them where they get angry because we are wearing a mask. But still, we have followed the rules and worked around this shift of change. We have tried to normalize it as much as possible to keep our vulnerable safe. This mandate, if passed, will not allow us to keep a regular routine with our residents. The only thing that has stayed normal in their lives since this pandemic began, us. We have been their normal. We will constantly be changing shifts on them. If we get a false positive, we will have to leave their sides and also put a huge burden on our staff that are still able to work while we quarantine. When is enough going to be enough? Our residents are safe. No one has contracted COVID. What is the need to further push this agenda? I second and third and fourth all of SRAs and the signatures at Mountain View Manor that have been signed by Teresa's petition. At a place where the majority of our staff has signed the petition only says one thing: listen. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today. Malika, is Chris Norris back on the line?
I will open the line once again.
Thank you.
It is open on my end.
Okay, we're having some kind of a connection problem with Miss Norris, so do you have a callback number for her, Malika, that you could call her after we unmute the next caller and try to figure out the issue, or is that possible?
We do see a number. It is not something they gave us, but we do have the numbers they called in. I can try that.
Okay, can you please unmute the next caller first?
Yes, Malika, if you could please unmute Sarah Reed.
Yeah, the line is open.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming in clear.
Okay, this is Sarah Reed, and I have 3 questions for you, the City Council, the EOC, Carl Hageman, and the officials calling the COVID protocols at the hospital. I'm asking you guys for a public response or address on these 3 questions because it's been very fuzzy, and there's so much information out there that I would like clarification on these 3 things. One, the first question has to do with PCR testing. The second question I have has to do with the money trail in regards to COVID testing. And number 3 has to do with the definition of emergency that we're using currently. So here we go. Here's question 1. It's known to be true that PCR testing is nearly 100% accurate when it's run at 17 cycles. You could think of it as magnifying the COVID test sample 17 times. And that from that 17, the more inaccurate the tests become if you magnify that COVID sample more and more times. So with that said, it's also known to be true that PCR testing at 35 cycles is wildly inaccurate. So of the 3% of the positive cases that PCR tests positive for, of that 3%, 97% of those positives are false positives. So essentially meaning that this PCR testing that is run at 35 cycles is 97% inaccurate. So my question is, why on earth are we subjecting the citizens of Petersburg and now possibly mandating the workers at Mountain View Manor to be subjected to the testing at the Petersburg Medical Center's 45 cycles. That seems like scientific fraud if you ask me, going in that direction. That's a failed test at that point. Which leads me to my second question, which is the money trail. I'm wondering how much money does the hospital receive and from who for every COVID test that they take? And how much money is received and from who for every positive result that they get? I'm also wondering how much money is received and from who for our town by being under a declaration of emergency. I'm wondering if money isn't kind of the root of this whole problem that Petersburg is having. Which leads me to my third question. If you could please remind me again whose definition of emergency we are going by. How long can an emergency last? We are coming up on a year now, and we're still under an emergency. But to me and to those around me, those that I ask and come in contact with, everybody feels like Petersburg is not in a state of emergency. So when you look at how the science is being manipulated, you can start to see that this whole emergency starts to feel like a charade or a facade or smoke and mirrors. So I'm pleading to you to let's stop. Let's stop going over the cliff like everyone else in the world seems to be doing. Let's do our own thing. Let's run on our own course. Let's stop marching to the beat of someone else's drum. Let's stop with the mandates, and let's start coming together and being a community again and doing things together and having Christmas dinners together. And let's start getting back to normal, which should be a safe and responsible thing to do, since according to the CDC, people under 70 have a 99.5% survival rate of this COVID. And the death rate of someone that's over 70 is 94.6% survival rate. So these tough questions, I think, need to be asked, and I think they need to be answered publicly, because there seems to be a lot of tension. So thank you for taking my call, and I will be attentively awaiting an answer to all these questions. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today, and we will try to get answers for your questions. Will the clerk please...
Thank you very much.
Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Malika, please unmute Nancy Hoshar.
1 moment.
Hello?
Line is open.
Okay. I'm calling in to vote no with my voice to the asymptomatic testing of Mountain View Manor and possibly Petersburg schools. The reason behind my no is that the current diagnostic tool, the PCR test that is driving the mandates, the lockdowns, the quarantines, etc., is faulty. I ask you as the Assembly to please look into this. Anthony Fauci has recently said anything over 35 cycles with PCR is not accurate. 45 has the ability to be 100% false positive. In January, a German virologist named Dr. Christian Drosten created a new laboratory assay to detect the coronavirus from the German Center for Infection Research. Neurosurveillance published this paper in their infectious disease epidemiology journal. It's called Detection of 2019 Novel Coronavirus 2019 and COVID by Real-Time RT-PCR. This paper, which is called the Johnson paper, and by extension the PCR test, is now being contested by 22 world-renowned medical health professionals. They have done an external peer review, brief summary on this. And I have listed just a brief summary of the errors they have found in the paper. They have 10. I have 4. Number 3 was the test cannot discriminate between the whole virus and virus fragments. Another, the PCR products have not been validated at the molecular level. Number 7 of their 10 was the PCR test contains neither a unique positive control to evaluate its specificity for SARS-CoV-2, nor a negative control to exclude the presence of other coronaviruses. Number 8 of their 10 was the test design in the Corman-Droston paper is so vague and flawed that one can go into dozens of different directions. Nothing is standardized, and there are no standard operating procedures. Number 10, we find severe conflicts. These are the authors of this peer review. They say, we find severe conflicts of interest for at least 4 authors, in addition to the fact that 2 of the authors of the Corman-Droston paper, Christian Droston and Chantel Ruskin, are members of the editorial board of Borough Surveillance. They also report about the cycling. If someone is tested by PCR as positive, when a threshold of 35 cycles or higher is used, as in the case of most laboratories in Europe and in the United States and in Petersburg, the probability that said person is actually infected is less than 3%. The probability that said result is a false positive is 97%. They conclude, and I will conclude, in light of our re-examination, this is the 22 authors of this, of the test protocol to identify SARS-CoV-2 described in the Corman-Droston paper, we have identified concerning errors and inherent fallacies which render the SARS-CoV-2 PCR test useless. The decision to recognize the errors apparent in the Corman-Droston paper has the benefit to greatly minimize human suffering. I humbly ask you as the Assembly to look into these numbers yourselves. We are being driven, this town, the world, by these PCR tests. Even Anthony Fauci has said above 35 cycles runs into false positives. We have to ask ourselves, we have to look at that. So I just ask you as the Assembly today to please look into these numbers for us. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Malika, if you could please unmute Will Ware.
One moment. Line is open.
شكايش يخاء بيساق بكتين تان نخط ستين خاخت باكسا يخاء. My name is Will Ware. I am Clinton of the Duckington clan of the Freshwater Mark Sockeye House. I apologize as I won't be as eloquent as some of the others here, but I'm going to be speaking in support of the landless effort. I do want to just address some of the previous callers' concerns and fears, and also some of the misstatements that were made regarding the differences between urban and village corps. There's a lot there. If anybody has questions, please feel free to give me a call. I think it's easy enough to get a hold of me, but I'd love to talk about some of the discrepancies in my previous testimony. I don't have enough time to get into that now. There are two things that we're still hearing in our community regarding the resolution of the gross oversight of the U.S. government's inclusion of Petersburg into the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, public access, and logging. I believe we settled and answered those concerns, regardless of what those in opposition claim. This bill does not restrict public access, but rather calls out specifically that public access will be required. There is a term in the bill stating reasonable restriction. Now, those in public service understand that this is a common term. Federal, state, local entities which manage public lands understand that this is necessary for maintenance of those said lands. ADOT, the Forest Service, and the Borough of Petersburg reasonably and temporarily restricts roads when replacing culverts, removing mudslides, or replacing bridges. These incidents also restrict access when dangers exist to the public. Again, this bill requires by law that public access will be ensured for subsistence hunting, fishing, and recreational activities in shooting. And we can look at recent land transfers that serve as an example of this. Second, the fear of logging is still being pushed by radicals who are either grossly misinformed or have no grasp of reality. Large-scale logging is not on the minds of anyone involved in promoting a landless initiative. To have this as a plan for Petersburg is simply a poor business decision and And yet, we're being asked to put language on this bill to address logging, hence making it a logging bill, when it is clearly not. And why take lands that hold timber value? Why choose land that has infrastructure there already? I guess I would ask, did we ask that the lands that are significant to our people be logged and roads put in? Duncan, employees Gay and Thomas hold significant historical and sacredness to our people. Take away the timber value. The land was utilized by our people for millennia and should be protected by its original inhabitants. Not done so without providing continued access, as the bill clearly states. I've been told on a few occasions that the history of our people in regards to logging is what drives that fear. Let me share with you the irony of that remark. When we bring up the history of settlers into this land, we get eye rolls. We're just citizen. That's ancient history that isn't practiced these days, at least not to the extent of what it once was. I suppose my response to the logging of native lands would then be the same. We have logging companies right here in this community that are considered heroes of the history of our town, and rightfully so. And yet, the irony is when we look at our native people, we look as villains and called evil, as some of the previous callers have called us. I'll close with this. Native corporations bring billions into the Alaskan economy every year, from everyday contracting to conscientiously and responsibly using the visitor industry to our benefit. To manufacturing and seafood production, we see huge economic development opportunities. Even right here in this community, we see benefits from our tribal organizations that make this community a better place for everyone. I've heard, look at what your people have done. I say, look at what we are doing. Look at the much needed economic development we can bring to the struggling town. I keep saying this over and over again. We're your neighbors. We go to church with you. We hunt next to you. Our kids go to school with your kids. We have no more ill intent for this land than you do, but rather quite the opposite. We're not a faceless corporation, but those you can talk face to face with. It's time to acknowledge the forces of this town and celebrate the strength that brings to Petersburg, rather than fake instincts of its original inhabitants.
You have 20 seconds left.
I've used it.
Thank you, Mr. Ware, for your testimony. Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Malika, please unmute Eric Lee.
Thank you. Line is open.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. This is Eric Lee, and I'm addressing agenda item 14B, which is questions regarding the Alaska Natives Without Land Bill. And my question is regarding at the last assembly meeting, it was pointed out that one parcel of land that was selected, which was in the middle of Midtop Island, was not on the maps. And I did look at the Alaska Natives Without Lands website, and I didn't find the maps that showed the parcels, and might have just missed it, I don't know. But anyway, I saw in the last week's paper that there was a map that showed Midtop Island parcels that had been selected, and there was one was interior number 2, that was right in the middle of Midtop Island, and then Midtop Island interior number 4. But there was a parcel Midtop Island interior number 3, so I'm assuming that that's the parcel that was stated as missing from the maps at the last one. My question simply is, where can the public see the statement that shows all the parcels on Midtop Island? So that's under my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Lee.
So that'll be to address the representative under that'll be available under agenda item 14B.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Mr. Lee, and it's been the case with a couple of other callers. I'm not quite sure what the issue is, but I believe the maps you're referring to that were in last week's Petersburg pilot were accurate to my knowledge. They mirror what we have received in the bill package. So, did you have any other testimony, or was that all you wanted to?
No, that was all. I'm curious about Maytop Islands interior number 3. Maybe I missed that too, but anyway, if we could ask what general item 14A regarding where the public can find complete maps that show all the parcels on Maytop Island, that would be great.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Malika, please unmute Dana Tinas.
One moment, please. I'm calling to speak about the new proposed... Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll start over. I'm calling to speak about the new proposed mandate on asymptomatic testing at the Manor. There are two issues I want to remind the Assembly of. One, asymptomatic persons are not the engine of transmission. They do not carry the viral load of a person who has symptoms. In a paper out of China, it was seen as long ago as last winter that one woman who went to the hospital for an entirely unrelated medical issue was tested and found to be positive for SARS-CoV-2. So 455 people were found to have been in contact with her. All were tested and followed, and none were shown to have contracted the virus. And none of the 455 contacts developed COVID symptoms. Even our own Dr. Fauci has been recorded saying asymptomatic persons are not the driver of this epidemic. Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, head of the World Health Organization's Emerging Diseases Unit, reported that, quote, from the data we have, it still seems to be rare that an asymptomatic person actually transmits onward to a secondary individual. We have a number of reports from countries who are doing very detailed contact tracing. They're following asymptomatic cases. They're following contacts. And they're not finding secondary transmission onward. It's very rare. In a recent study published in Nature called Post-Lockdown SARS-CoV-2 Nucleic Acid Screening in nearly 10 million residents of Wuhan, China, identified 300 asymptomatic positive cases through a massive screening program of more than 9 million Chinese citizens post-lockdown in Wuhan. Using PCR tests, samples of all the asymptomatic cases were also cultured in a lab, and no viable virus was found. And it cannot transmit the virus. The scientists identified and followed over 1,000 close contacts of the asymptomatic cases and found that none of their contacts tested positive for COVID-19. They noted, compared with, or for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, they noted, compared with symptomatic patients, asymptomatic infected persons generally have low quantity of viral loads and a short duration of viral shedding, which decrease the transmission risk of SARS-CoV-2. The second issue is the known false positive rate of the PCR test as administered in the United States. We've had the information since April that PCR tests return false positives when the cycle threshold is too high. Each cycle amplifies the sample exponentially. Again, our own Dr. Fauci has said that any test over a cycle threshold of 34 will just be showing dead nucleotides and other debris and will not be meaningful for diagnosis of a virus. In a paper called Viral RNA Load as Determined by Cell Culture out of the European Journal of Clinical Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, the authors stated, quote, based on a set of 183 samples from 155 patients, we observed a significant relationship between viral RNA load and culture positivity. Further, we observed a significant relationship between cycle threshold value and culture positivity rate. Samples with a cycle threshold value of 13 to 17 all led to positive culture. Culture positivity rate then decreased progressively according to cycle threshold values to only 12% at 33 cycle threshold, and no culture was obtained from samples with a cycle threshold over 34. No culture. A friend who is a nurse
says she discovered that the state of Alaska is running their test at a 37-cycle threshold. That is 3 orders of amplification higher than the 34 mentioned in the French study, which returns a rate of 0 accuracy. But it gets worse. Petersburg's new head of the lab informed us over a week ago that Petersburg is using 45 for the cycle threshold. Perhaps she was mistaken. With that threshold, how can we trust the numbers? And then there's an interesting story out of the Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in New Hampshire from some years back. As Gina Colada reported in the Times on January 2007, with healthcare workers at Dartmouth Hitchcock Medical Center in Lebanon, New Hampshire, coughing uncontrollably in the spring of 2006, they were sure it was an outbreak of pertussis, whooping cough. They even used a PCR test that confirmed 142 doctors and workers had contracted whooping cough. They were duly given antibiotics, revaccinated, and sent home, but it was all a lie. And they actually took samples, and there was 100% false positive rate among the tests. And I think those workers just had a very copy version of the common cold. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today. Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Yes, Malika, please unmute David Beebe.
Line is open, thank you.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
You're a little bit faint, but clear. If you could speak louder, maybe Mr. Beebe, it would be better.
Okay, thank you. My name is David Beebe. I'm speaking on behalf of myself. And it's been a month now since Senator Murkowski introduced Senate Bill 4889, which I see now has a different title and number. It's now Senate Bill 4891, and I'm hoping that public comments submitted to the Senate subcommittee somehow rendered impertinent because the title and the number of the Senate bill involved is now different. The latest version, S4891, titled Unrecognized Southeast Alaskan Native Communities Recognition and Compensation Act, is a title regarded by many as offensively misleading. This is because the title contradicts historical facts. Those facts are well documented over the past several decades that NAICS have recognized and generously compensated the natives in these communities. So at issue here are the usual failures of transparency in legislative process, and in particular public process. Public process is important in this legislation in order to fully disclose in public hearings the myriad questions arising from these specific land selections. The proponents of this bill repeatedly claim, since several prior failed iterations of the bills that have been discussed, there's no need to understand the specific contents of the current legislative version. I respectfully disagree. Now that we know where the selections are, it follows that questions of who made the selections, precisely why they were selected, and for what purposes, and last but not least, how much in the way of taxpayer money gets transferred to 5 new corporate entities that would be established in Southeast. As of today, the Congressional Budget Office reports the cost estimate for this legislation has not been received. Given the amount of public infrastructure, certainly measured in the tens of millions of dollars in these land selections, it would be good to know what the taxpayer has forfeited to these 5 brand new native corporations should this bill pass. With Senate 4891, Senator Murkowski further expands the 70,000 acres of the Sea-Alaska legislation and imposes more than 115,000 more acres for her corporate privatization agenda on the Tongass National Forest. The timing could not be worse as we face the legacy of a century of devastation of entire watersheds, stripped of their forests, exported in the round to China, Japan, and beyond. This reduces the quality of life of our rural residents to colonial laborers on multinational tree plantations. The last several years of failed wild salmon runs, and extreme weather events are further evidence of catastrophic climate disruption we were warned about. These are evident both as record-breaking summer droughts imperiling municipal water supplies and municipal power, and the sequential atmospheric rivers of the past month alone have resulted in the recent massive landslides all over Southeast with incalculable losses of life, private property, and both natural capital and public infrastructure. Also, we need to understand ANCSA's model of multinational corporate privatization of public lands and resources include environmental deregulation. The unsustainable corporate asset stripping that has already occurred on the most biologically valuable and at-risk watersheds of the Tongass National Forest are at the center of our present unfolding ecological crisis in Southeast. Senate Bill 4891 will only exacerbate and accelerate our regional ecological and social collapse. In conclusion, the 49-year history of ANCSA in Southeast Alaska speaks for itself as the final act of post-genocidal assimilation of Tlingit, Tsimshian, and Haida cultures of Southeast Alaska. Please recognize the social, cultural, and environmental harms this legislation will further. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today. Will the clerk please unmute the next caller?
Let me double check, Mayor Jensen, but I believe we have one more caller, but it is for items unrelated. Let me make sure here.
And we couldn't reach Chris Norris. Malika couldn't with...
Correct. She can go... Chris's line is open. She can hear movement, but Chris is not answering.
Okay, well, we've tried. That's the best we can do. So if there's no other testifiers under items related to the agenda, we'll move to persons to be heard on items unrelated to the agenda.
Okay, and Malika, if you could please unmute Charles Smythe.
Thank you. The line is open.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Chuck Smythe, and I am one of the principal investigators for the ISA research report, a study of 5 Southeast Alaska communities. And I would like to provide some clarifications about that research. First, I'll preface my statements describing the issue of Aboriginal title in Southeast Alaska. That was first recognized by the Federal Court of Claims in 1959 and 1968, the Tlingit and Haida land claims. That was found in all the lands that were taken by for the Forest Service and the National Park Service were found to be in Aboriginal title. And again, by Congress in 1971 under ANCSA, again it was found that Alaska, as stated in the Statehood Act, there was Aboriginal title throughout the state. Petersburg was included in the Tlingit and Haida land claims, but not in ANCSA. Aboriginal title is defined as title by virtue of Aboriginal use and occupancy. So I'd like to discuss the village eligibility issue. The criteria to be considered eligible for ANCSA benefits, Native villages had to have at least 25 natives in residence, not be of modern and urban in character, and have a majority Native population. Southeast villages were treated differently from other regions due to their participation in the earlier land claim settlement. They were listed in a separate section, and unlike earlier sections that dealt with villages in other regions, this section did not include a provision for unlisted villages to become eligible. ANCSA also included a special provision for 4 communities that were not small, rural, native villages. Under this provision, Juneau and Sitka, along with Kodiak and Kenai, were allowed to establish urban corporations. This provision was introduced by Senator Stevens in the final bill during its consideration by the Conference Committee. No one objected to the 4 communities gaining eligibility at the last minute. But as stated in the report, the sense of the Conference Committee was that no more communities would be accepted for urban corporation status. So during the passage of ANCSA, 4 communities that were of modern and urban in character were given special recognition, but the remainder were cut off from consideration. The study did not discover any record of criteria or evaluation that was used to determine if these communities were more qualified than the others. And in fact, the criteria for what constituted modern and urban character was not defined until 1974. And if interested, I could read you those criteria. The other part of the report, which is the report that, or the portions that I was responsible for, dealt with the comparison, the historical comparison of these 5 communities with those villages that were included in ANCSA. Briefly, for Petersburg, Petersburg was a native family fishing settlement when white settlers arrived at the turn of the century. Two homesteads acquired by the first white settler, Peter Bushman, were located on either side of the native fish camp on Hammer Slough. Other native fish camps were south of town in the Wrangell Narrows, and the site of the former villages was located across the Narrows at the mouth of Petersburg Creek. Early in the century, a cannery was opened at Petersburg, as you well know. In 1902, 24 Indians fished for the cannery, and natives continued to fish and work in the cannery in subsequent years. The early native residents of Petersburg came from small settlements in the area, and later from Cake and Wrangell. Natives lived and moored their boats in an area of small cabins next to the cannery and on the north side of Hammer Slough, up to the hill behind the waterfront. The latter area became the center of the native community in Petersburg and was known as Indian Street or Indian Bridge.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Snipe. We do have a 5-minute
Mr. Mayor?
time limit.
One question.
Okay, well, I could provide more information at a later date. Thank you.
You could provide a contact info to our clerk, then the assembly could reach out to you.
Okay.
Thank you. Is there anyone, well, I see we had another caller call in, so the clerk will have the operator unmute Elizabeth Hart.
Yes, Malika, please unmute Elizabeth Hart.
The line is unmuted, thank you. Hi, I'm Elizabeth Hart. I'm speaking for myself and as a healthcare worker. I've worked at Petersburg Medical Center since 2001 and have been a nurse for 16 years now. It's been my experience that many people don't really know what we do in our hospital until they or a loved one really needs us. I was one of those people. I just came here to have my kids and then went on my merry way. Then it's an eye-opener from managing heart attacks to traumas, stabilizing patients who need a higher level of care, and treating patients here until recovery. Let's keep in mind that because COVID-19 is an international pandemic that is continuing to worsen, it remains an emergency unlike any other in our lifetime. This is the reason why the emergency has lasted for 10 months and is likely to continue for an extended period of time. Our numbers in Alaska are rising at an alarming rate. Our resources are notoriously limited, and our hospitals are filling up. We may reach the point where we are unable to medevac critically ill patients for lack of beds elsewhere. Our local healthcare workers are exhausted. Our staff is very limited. Please wear a mask to support your healthcare workers that are your neighbors and friends, here to help you
when you or your loved ones have a health crisis of any kind. Masks, hand hygiene, and social distancing are the most effective way to minimize the transmission of COVID-19. As the local pastor stated, wearing a mask is simply a matter of charity. Please just follow the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony today. Are there any other callers? Clerk Thompson.
There are not, Mayor Jensen. I believe the other callers are calling for the agenda item regarding the land legislation.
Okay.
I think we're good.
Okay, well, we'll move on to item 9, Board Commission and Committee reports. There are none. Consent agenda, no items under that item. That brings us to item 11, report of other officers, and we have a report from the Petersburg Medical Center CEO, Mr. Hofstetter.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're clear. It's a little faint.
Okay. I'll try to speak up.
That's better.
All right. Yeah, so just to update our facility, we're seeing obviously a large increase across the state with COVID, which we're monitoring very closely. We're seeing hospitalizations and increase in mortality as well. I sit on a couple of committees at the state level with ASHNA, our state hospital, and Nursing Home Association, and it's certainly difficult to hear some of our colleagues going through this in their community, with staff shortages and the burden of the spread and trying to contain it. So it's certainly something, just right now, if the worst case is I get some criticism on my recommendations, I think I'm okay with that, especially as it creeps in within the state. Our staff are working countless hours. We're trying to see patients safely during the pandemic. There's nothing about this virus that is easy. We're very fortunate to keep our cases low, and we're going to be pushing very hard to keep those low. We have a short staff as we report, and we also have a vaccine on the horizon. So that's good news. I know that there might be some concern about that, but I would encourage the community. There's a great call. It's called the ECHO, E-C-H-O, that the state puts on. It's all the leading experts from epidemiology, Dr. Zink, Dr. McLaughlin. They provide a lot of great information to the community on the legitimacy of some of the things like testing, masking, the vaccine, which is certainly going to be a hot topic going forward. We're actually preparing in our facility for the vaccine, since healthcare providers in long-term care are going to be and emergency responders are going to be the first on the list to obtain it. So we're going to have an internal Q&A with our physicians on the efficacy and the safety of the vaccine and the logistics behind it. So we're getting ready for that once it gets approved. We're fortunate enough to receive some grant funds with the state. They had some CARES Act funding that they had to, and we have to probably spend it down. Well, we do have to spend it down by December 30th, so we're reviewing some of that information. It's to really increase some of our testing availability. We're getting a new unit to try to test, rapid test. We're looking at filtration of baby units for like a HIPAA filter, basically. It's in certain areas. Renovation of our long-term care vans so that our long-term care residents can see families safely. We've modified that older vans, so that's sitting there in our lot, getting ready to use. Staffing, again, very difficult, very thin. We have actually a lot of areas that we've had to ramp up in preparation for COVID, whether it's testing. We've also seen a huge increase in our home health clients, so we're advertising for positions to help meet that need. So a lot of scrambling, a lot of changes, trying to stay up on everything has been extremely challenging. But I feel like overall I'm super impressed with our staff. We have an amazing group. I feel like we're on top of things as much as we can be. And that's about all I have to report.
Mr. Hofstadter, any Assembly members have any questions of the CEO? Member Mucci?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Will Phil be available under the asymptomatic testing discussion?
Will you still be on the line, Mr. Hofstadter? If not, Member Mucci, do you have a specific question?
Well, I just think it's not a specific question, but I would encourage Phil to be available to be part of the conversation. I don't want him to get...
Yep, I'll be around. That's fine.
Thank you.
And that brings us to Mr. Hagerman, the EOC IC commander.
Well, Mr. Mayor, can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're a little quiet, but you're clear.
Okay, I'll try to lean in here. So I submitted a memo to the Assembly, and I figured I would just read that into the record, and then I'll take questions afterwards. That's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you. So, after much work to arrive at a COVID-19 community risk communication plan, the EOC is presenting the plan to the Assembly and public in draft form. The goal of making the plan available as a draft is so that the Assembly and public can take time to read the provisions, understand the indicators being used, ask questions about the plan, and request improvements or clarifications in order for this to be an effective tool for the community. Once the EOC is satisfied that the plan has had adequate public review, it will be returned to the Assembly for final approval. It is a living document that may change when new information is gained or local, state, or federal mandates are enacted or repealed. As a COVID-19-based risk communication tool, the plan has incorporated applicable mandates as appropriate, but is predominantly a community recommendation guide. As the risk levels rise and fall, each colored risk designation has general and detailed mitigations to be followed or considered by various groups in the community. The face of the plan is the dashboard. It is accessed via the internet, the local COVID Information Hub website, the Borough website, and there are links leading to it from the hospital website. It will have local COVID-19 data and risk level indications plainly stated and updated daily. There are embedded links in the dashboard so that someone can go to another page for additional information, such as risk indicators, definitions of commonly used terms, or more detailed mitigation information for each risk level. It is a very hands-on type of dashboard that will provide the community with information, data, disease status, and healthcare system status. It's important to note that both the school and hospital have their own internal risk mitigation plans with their own color-coded system. Facility-specific risk level indicators will be clearly visible on the community dashboard and will link to the written plans or policies of both the school and hospital for anyone that would like additional information on those plans or policies. The EOC committee will rely on the daily data updates and a core group, including myself, the command staff, which also includes the medical officer, public information officer, safety officer, and liaisons, and section chiefs for operations, medical, planning, finance, and logistics to determine the appropriate risk level for the community. The moderate or high risk level within the community, once achieved, will remain at that level for a minimum of 7 days before being considered for reduction, based on improving situational risk indicators. This is a cautious approach and will prevent a situation where the risk level changes too often and creates confusion. With that being stated, the risk level may rise to a higher level at any time if risk indicators show a need to increase mitigation efforts and control the spread of the virus. There are recommended mitigation strategies for each risk level. The Those recommendations include guidance on gatherings, personal social health measures, social distancing, essential business and government activities, travel, schools, and non-essential business activities. The guidance allows our residents and businesses to have a frame of reference on the best practices for coronavirus mitigations, depending on the severity of the virus situation in Petersburg. The goal for all of Petersburg should be to keep our local risk assessment in the yellow as much as possible, and to eventually get to green once the overarching risk to health care and well-being are no longer threatened by COVID-19. As a draft plan, I'm requesting the Assembly and public offer feedback at any time to make the plan better. The overriding goal of the plan is to communicate with the community about the status of the coronavirus and its impact on the healthcare system and our citizens' well-being. If we aren't communicating well, the plan is not working to its full potential. So I would ask the Assembly and public to forward any questions, comments, or clarification requests to the EOC email address, which is simply eoc@petersburgak.gov. The dashboard and plan can be found, like I said, there's a link on the Borough website, also the COVID Information Hub website, and links from the hospital website. And with that, I'll take any questions that the Assembly may have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hagerman. I have one question to start off. So your plan is to ask for approval at the next Assembly meeting after 2 weeks of public input?
It could be brought back to the Assembly in 2 weeks, as soon as 2 weeks, but it could be longer, depending on the number of comments and questions that we have from the public in the Assembly. I don't necessarily want to rush this. The dashboard is live right now and will be updated daily. It's just a matter of having enough public review for the Assembly to be comfortable with rolling out that dashboard and using it on a daily basis. So it could be as soon as 2 weeks, but it doesn't not necessarily would be.
Okay, thank you. I guess with that answer, the dashboard is currently active. The mitigation plan or the levels of cases, that is not set in stone yet, what the community will do in a response, or is it?
Right, well, there are levels, there are risk indicator levels in the plan, and that's one thing I would encourage the Assembly to go look at, and you would access that by going to the dashboard, and in the upper left-hand corner of the dashboard itself, there are two hyperlinks, one for definitions, which just gives a rundown of all the terms used on the dashboard, and there's another one for the risk communication plan. And if you click on the risk communication plan, that will take you to a bunch of tables, one being the risk indicator table, and you'll see a number of risk indicators that go into determining what the current risk level is for Petersburg, and the thresholds for each of those indicators going up or down depending on the status of that particular item.
Okay, I guess I'm a little confused on whether it'll be implemented or not, those levels, but Member Lynn has a question.
Yeah, actually I have two questions. The first one, I want to go back to, in your letter, Carl, under the multi-agency plan collaboration, you talked about facility-specific risk level indicators. And can you put some more meat on that for us for just a second?
Sure, I sure can. So that paragraph in the memo refers to the site-specific plans of the school and the hospital. I called out that both of those facilities have their own policies and plans in place. The school being their Smart Start plan, and the hospital has a risk level policy. And so what I meant by that comment in my report was that the additional detail for the school and the hospital are contained, as far as when they go up and down in risk levels, are contained in those plans that are specific to those facilities.
Member Lynn has another question.
A follow-up question to that, and then another one. So, if the public looks at those plans and has comments, will the team be taking comments on those plans also in addition to the one for the borough?
We can certainly forward any comments that we get from the public to the hospital and the school. But the policies and plans that are in place at those facilities are already approved by their boards, and I don't, unless it's a very good item for them to consider, I don't see them changing much at this point, but we will surely forward any comments that we get for their consideration.
Okay. The last question then I have for you is that one of the things that I think the public will really want to do is, how do you make the determination of going, for instance, from the green to the yellow to the red? If I'm commenting on it, that's probably where my comments would want to be, and I think that goes back to something the mayor was at. Where do they specifically, does the public specifically look for that criteria that the team's going to use to make those bridges or those transitions from one to another?
Sure, good question. So again, it would go to the dashboard, and in the upper left-hand corner of that dashboard, there's a link that is called the Risk Communication Plan. So you have your cursor over that and click on it, and it will take you to another page that has quite a bit of information, and it describes the plan, the purpose of the plan, and it dives into the general litigation measures for each level, and also, and to your question, it has a table that's titled Risk Level Indicators and Thresholds for Increasing or Decreasing Petersburg Community Risk Level. And so that table is divided into 3 sections. Risk indicators that have to do with COVID-19 situation, healthcare system capacity, and disease control. And there are 10 different indicators that also have metrics attached to them. For instance, I'll just talk to you about one key question is what is the level of disease burden in Petersburg and how is it changing? So one of the indicators we have for that particular question is the 7-day average of new community transmission cases. And if we are less than 2 cases over a 7-day period, we're in yellow. If we're in a 2 to 5 cases over a 7-day period, that would indicate orange in that category. And if we're above 6 and above cases in a 7-day period, that would indicate a red. And there are 10 other categories that all have similar thresholds and information on up or going down in each of those criteria. And so the EOC will use the criteria, the current situation in Petersburg, to determine what the risk level is for each of those different risk indicators, and that will help us to arrive at the overall risk level for the community.
Okay, thank you, Carl.
Member Mucci has a question. Carl?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll admit I haven't really dug into this in detail like I would like to, but kind of following up on Member Lynn's question, so between the borough, the PMC, and the school risk levels, they're all using the same criteria to figure out what their risk level is? That's my first question.
No, to answer Member Mucci's question, no, each facility, each entity has their own plan, and there are different things that go into each of those plans. So that it's quite possible that the community could still be in yellow, even though the school has elevated their risk level or the hospital has elevated their risk level. It just depends on what criteria that has elevated for them to kick into a higher risk. it hopefully will not be confusing. That's the purpose of the dashboard is to lay it all out there and show, where the school and hospital and community are all at the same time. And I'm hoping that with that transparency that it will be clear what is going on as far as the disease situation in Petersburg.
Thank you. The other question I have, Carl, is, in looking at the dashboard and looking at page 3 of what we have here in front of us, I'm looking at the borough risk level, which is low in this, what we're looking at right now, and I look at the school risk level, which is low as well. While they're both low, one is colored yellow and the other is colored green. And I know it's not a big deal, but if we're trying to simplify things, I don't know, I've been accused of being colorblind a couple of times, but it would seem like if the school risk level and the borough risk level were both low, they would have the same color indicator. I mean, that's not a big deal, but I think if we're going to try and keep things simple, that was one of my questions by just looking at this over the last couple of days. Thank you.
So it sounds like, Carl, we have 3 different plans for the borough, the medical center, and the school currently. And I'd like to go back and try to phrase this question right. You've presented this as a plan, and on my computer, on my iPad here, I can't find where you give the descriptions and the what will be implemented at certain levels on this on my iPad. So, but this plan is actually in place, or you just, like, I think I asked that question earlier. I want to know if we get to the green or the red over 6 cases, are we going to implement the lockdown, or is this dashboard, are those criteria currently active?
I understand the question now, Mr. Mayor. Sorry about the confusion. So I said that it was active because it is live. It is accessible via the internet, and it will be updated on a daily basis. But until it's approved by the Assembly, all the recommendations are there for informational purposes only. Once it's approved, and again, these are written as recommendations. There's no strict hard and fast requirement, for instance, for gatherings to be limited if we go up in level to orange or red until it's approved in its final version. Let me rephrase that. There's no recommendations at all or mandates at all. It's all a recommendation at this point. So depending on what the disease situation is in Petersburg, the Assembly may choose to take to mandate certain actions if it gets really bad. But overall, this is a guidance. This is much like the state has done with their reopening plan. It is putting out the best recommended practices for businesses and individuals to follow, depending on the status of the disease in Petersburg. It's not set up as a mandate, except for the certain things that have already been mandated, such as masking. That is written into the plan as mandated because it is law at this point. So, does that answer your question?
I guess, yeah, pretty much. It just tells me that this is just out for review, and currently those levels of restriction, for lack of the proper word, will not be implemented unless there's Assembly action, and this won't be implemented, this whole plan, unless it's approved by the Assembly, correct?
That is true, yes.
Okay, okay. I'm clear. Any questions from Member Tremblay or Member Kinsinger?
No, not at this time. I just wanted to thank Carl for all the work going into this. I can see the level of detail and nuance in the different levels and the many different factors that are at play, and I think it's going to be really helpful. It's really easy to find from the Borough website. If you go to just ci.pittsburgh.ak.us, for anyone at home, it's right on the front page and is in a little blue banner draft COVID-19 dashboard. I'm excited to hear what people find useful about it, what people find confusing about it, because this is a really great informative tool that anybody in charge of public spaces, public-facing businesses that try to organize people around, I think this is a really useful guide for knowing when to exercise extra caution as opposed to the current standard form of caution given the state of the global pandemic that we're in. Just thank you, Carl. I know it was quite a bit of work, and I've been not so patiently kind of restraining myself from asking about it. So thank you for bringing it to us, and I'm excited to really be getting into it and seeing what the public has to say. So thanks again.
Okay, if there's no other questions of Mr. Hageman, I don't see any in the audience here.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr. Kinsinger.
If I could request that Mr. Hageman give us an update at the next meeting, if he has any access to any plans that the state has for vaccine distribution, specifically dealing with us here in Petersburg.
Okay, did you pick up that? You picked that up, Carl?
Yes, I sure did. And actually, I'll just offer a quick word right now. There is a tremendous amount of planning ongoing right now in the state and in Petersburg. The medical center and public health nurse are both really working hard to sort out all the details for vaccination here locally, and the hospital is taking the lead on this, and they're doing a very good job of getting organized and planning for the eventuality of the vaccine showing up in Petersburg. Initially, it would be geared towards healthcare workers and long-term care residents, and from there it expands as the vaccine becomes available to other priority groups. And those priority groups have been decided by the federal government and then fine-tuned by the state government and passed down to all the different distribution points. So there is a tremendous amount of work being done on that, and the goal is to be ready for the first shipments of vaccine, which could come before the end of the month.
Okay, thank you, Carl. Does that answer your question, Member Kinsinger?
Yes, I just want I just like either Phil or Carl at the next meeting to kind of outline if they have any more information on exactly how it's all going to happen, just so the public isn't caught unawares.
Well, I'm sure we will be updated daily, but yeah, we'll have a presentation at the next meeting, I would hope. There's no other questions? Member Michi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't know if this is the time, but would it be possible to get just an update from Carl to see how the masking mandate is going in town? I don't know where else to ask it, but since he's here, I was just curious.
Yeah, I don't know what specifically you're asking for.
I just wondered if it seems to be going okay, if we're having issues, if the police department is finding out issues. I'm just looking for just a little feedback from Carl and I guess the chief.
Do you have any response to that one, Mr. Hagerman? I mean, I know it's...
I guess just a brief comment, I suppose, that I think I've talked to many people about the masking, and I've been out and around a little bit. So in some cases, I think it's gotten better, and in other cases, it has not. We're hearing from the police department that residents that are normally out in the evenings and later in the night are masking less. But I think that people that are standing by at the post office, going in the stores, are masking more. So it is kind of up in the air. As we heard today by some callers, there's still quite a bit of resistance to it, and
it's something that we're working through, but I still believe that it's in the best interest of Petersburg to have that mandate in place, and hopefully people will understand that's the way to keep our businesses open and our school open, to try and reduce transmission as much as possible. So I guess that's my comment. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the mayor's report. And we're seeking letters of interest. The Assembly is seeking letters of interest from Borough residents who wish to serve the community by filling a vacant seat on the following boards and commissions until October 2021 municipal election. We have 2 seats on the Planning Commission, and we have 2 vacant seats on the Safety Advisory Board. And later in the meeting, we will go over a letter from Jim Floyd wanting a seat on the Planning Commission, so at that time I would intend to appoint him to that position. Letters of interest for those positions should be submitted to Clerk Thompson at the Borough office located at 12 South Nordic Drive, or by mailing to Post Office Box 329, Petersburg, Alaska 99833, or by emailing to dthompson@petersburgak.gov. And I'm going to give a brief report on the Alaska Municipal League, and Mr. Lim, I think, wants to chime in on the financial part of it. Since it was held virtually this year, it actually took place over 2 weeks, so it's kind of hard to participate in the whole meeting. I've attended a few of the presentations. First was the Alaska Conference of Mayors. Legislative strategy and priorities. The deficit, $2.3 billion, was talked about. The governor will come out with his proposed budget December 15th. One of the things that the Conference of Mayors talked about, what would you tell the governor if you had a chance to talk with him for 20 minutes? And consensus was no more financial transfers to municipalities, school bond debt, PERS, etc. The membership for Alaska Conference of Mayors now is up to 107, which is an increase. Bryce Ward, the mayor of Fairbanks, the chair this year. He wants to meet more frequently by Zoom and meet with commissioners from the administration on a maybe quarterly basis, just to get information from those leaders. Passed resolutions 01-2021 and 02-2021, borough formation and support of the governor's health alert, and those were added to the list of resolutions. I believe there was 13 of them that were subsequently passed by the board of directors, or by the board, AML board. Talked about the Alaska Marine Highway System reform, the reshaping reform document turned into the governor. He will consider it and look at budgeting for it. In that report, labor is 65 to 70% of the cost for the ferry system, so that was an interesting number. And the reform group couldn't find a long-term plan, is what the consensus was. And you could go, should go on to Alaska Municipal League site and find that reform. I don't have a copy of it. Talked about the election results in the state of Alaska. Lots of new House members, and it could mean slow organization for the House. Remember, it wasn't too many years back that it was a month or better before they had organization, so they couldn't handle any meetings or have any meetings. Community jails was talked about. Don't expect more money, but maybe the same. Payment should be coming out soon for this year, and I don't know if we've received that yet. And then, like I mentioned earlier, the last Municipal League board, or the voting members passed all 13 resolutions. There was a few changes. If you want to see what those resolutions are, you could go to the Alaska Municipal League site and find them. So that is, Member Lynn, do you have something to add to that before I go on to the next topic on the mayor's report?
Yeah, if I may, just 2 points. I concentrated primarily on all those presenters that talked about where we thought the legislator would be with the budget. And I concur with you is that looking at looking at the budget for this coming year, I think we need to just not plan on any kind of funds coming down from the state. We're lucky on the jail funding from the standpoint that we've got it through, I believe it's January, or at least through part of next year. But from there on, I think there's a question about it. So I think when we get into the budget cycle here, we probably need to make some upfront some recommendations that the Assembly does before the staff spends so much time, putting together a budget. At least that's where I came out from that discussion. Just one other point is that I want to talk about the position. Alaska Municipal League has position statements on a lot of different issues. One of them being is the ferry system. And when the group met on the position statements, that's one of them we felt goes back to what the mayor said, that we felt really needed to be taken a look at and updated. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Like I said, it was a pretty long 2 weeks just to try to do your normal life and fit in and out of things there. So anyway, I want to give a report also. We had a meeting with Southern Southeast communities potentially impacted by proposed legislation of the U.S. Senate Bill 4891, the Unrecognized Southeast Alaska Native Communities Recognition and Compensation Act. I attended from Petersburg. Member Bucci was on the call. And Clerk Thompson was there. John Bowling from the City of Craig, Steve Silver, their lobbyist. We had people from Ketchikan, Carl Amelon, their manager, Bob Sievertson, their mayor, Lisa Von Bargen from Wrangell, the manager, Steve Brzonka, the mayor, our lobbyists, Brad Gilman and Sebastian O'Kelly were on the call, myself, and then from Senator Murkowski's staff, it was Joan Crowther from D.C., Lila Kimbrell, her state director, Sherry Klein from Ketchikan, and Dana Herden from Juneau. So up to now, currently the bill has been introduced by the Senate, and it hasn't been introduced by the House, and they're getting pretty close to the end of this session, so we'll see where it goes from here. Josh Boding from Craig is on Prince of Wales for a new urban corporation. Their concerns were sure public access is guaranteed for any land given to the urban corporations. Bob Sievertson and Carl Amelon from Ketchikan both basically said that the land picked in their area, whether the Ketchikan Urban Corporation, whatever it would be named, was mostly on Prince of Wales, so it didn't concern them too much because it wasn't in their backyard. My comment was just mirroring our letter that we agreed on the 18th in the special meeting to send to Murkowski's office and CC to Senator Sullivan and Congressman Young. So I just reiterated what we put forward as an assembly, and basically was hold off, and all the communities were asking for public comment, and they felt like there wasn't public comment up to this point on the land selections or the infrastructure that could potentially be conveyed. Mayor Wrangell said they reached out to their native folks in Wrangell and tried to get some input, and they have had no response. Mr. Crowther said he will share all this information with the senator and see, and it hasn't happened yet, is what I've understood this morning. One question that was interesting by Mayor Sievertson from Ketchikan was the land selection following the selection rules and criteria of ANCSA? And John Crowther said no. So it's different. It's not select all blocks of land. It's basically just, I don't know who was the group that selected the land, and maybe we'll get some clarification from that later on. But the director for Senator Murkowski, the state director, Lila Kimbrell, her comment towards the end of the meeting was, we have some homework to do with your issues, need to clarify some things, need to make sure we get this right. Follow up conversations with you all, want a good product, not something we are pushing through and rushing this legislation. So maybe we'll step back a little bit, we'll see and revisit this and have public meetings and public input. So that was basically, it was about a little over an hour-long meeting. It was quite interesting, and I think they are listening to everybody's concerns, every party involved. So that basically concludes my mayor's report. I would now turn it over to the manager for his report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The police body cameras have already paid for themselves with a recent complaint lodged against the police department. False reporting charges were filed against the suspects. A sincere thank you to the assembly from everyone at the police department for their purchase of the body cameras. We had officers do a walkthrough at Beaufort schools to familiarize themselves with new procedures in case of need response from law enforcement. And the PD is currently working with HR to advertise for an officer position in response to one of our officers leaving the department soon. PD has helped the water department achieve an interim approval to operate the Cabin Creek pig launcher. Final approval is contingent upon submission of engineered stamped record drawings and certification that the work was completed under the direction of the engineer. The rainstorm of December 1st caused the Scow Bay pump station to be overwhelmed by stormwater. Wastewater backed up into 3 homes on the narrow side of the highway. If COVID hadn't kind of slowed our contractors' efforts down, we would have been able to get that project done last summer, and we would have been in a much better position to handle the extreme storm flows. The project is planned to be started in the spring. All Scow Bay residents that live south of Kings Row should please check all their roof drains and yard drains and sewer cleanouts to ensure that no storm water is being allowed to enter the sewer system. These types of inflows are against the wastewater municipal code because they can lead to the overwhelmed sewer system during rain events and cause also to havoc on the system, including the damage that occurred on December 1st. Please check your property for any of these connections and make sure that any storm water is being directed to a natural drainage and not a sewer pipe. The Power and Light line crew was able to string the lights for the community Christmas tree in time for the tree lighting on the 27th and place decorations on the downtown light poles. Our reservoirs had started to drop with some of the colder weather, but all the rain recently in November through December so far will likely add significant water to the power lakes before the true winter freeze-up sets in. Morris Engineering and Anderson Contracting were here in town last week to work on the breaker panels and the fire panel at the Aquatic Center. Thanks to the Volunteer Fire Department for helping through some of the fire watch changes that we had to make. The Aquatic Center is back on track with all swim times the same as before we closed. These times were announced on KFSK and on our Facebook page and on the website, as well as located throughout the facility. We were unable to completely go off the fire watch as the new fire panel was not compatible with our old sirens and strobes that are throughout the facility. The contractors were able to find about a dozen of the newest fire strobes and get them installed, but we have a few more that we could not get our hands on, so they ordered those, and we'll get those installed when they show back up. Parks and Rec staff is working on a plan for a Christmas event. This will be outdoor, COVID-conscious event, so bundle up and come enjoy the magic. This event will be December 12th from 10 to 12, and information on that is starting to roll out as we speak. We did have some heavy rains caused a storm drain backup and flood the end of the hallway at the community center. Thanks to Public Works for coming to help pump water and get the situation under control, and school staff who quickly jumped into gear and helped take care of removing the water from inside the facility. We're having some problems with the library snowmelt system. We've asked Mattingly Electric to help us work on a solution for those. Sandy is starting to work on the requirement for the state of Alaska ambulance recertification, which is due every 2 years. Josh received his EMT2 certification and also took an instructor orientation course with Southeast Regional EMS to be eligible to teach emergency trauma technician courses. We continue to do daily, as you heard from Shirin, we continue to do daily screening on all employees at the manor, including temperature checks. All staff answers daily questionnaires. We have a very strict sick leave policy, and we endeavor to hand washing
watch areas multiple times a day. We continue to take daily temps on all the residents and monitor for any signs of illness. There are tickets being sold for the covered deck project. The drawing will take place on February 14th, 2021, or sooner if all tickets are sold. 9 beautiful quotes will be given for 9 winning tickets. See Sally Dwyer or Sheilyn if you'd like a ticket and have any questions. PIA has awarded the Manor Deck Project a $32,000 grant for supplies for the building of the deck. The cost of the building supplies has risen 35 to 40% since February. Supplies should be ordered by the end of next week, and supplies will be stored until spring. A huge thank you to PIA. We did get all of our snow removal equipment prepped and ready for winter conditions, and then we haven't really seen much. We have been putting down sand and spot plowing where needed, but have not had to call out the full snow removal crew yet. The streets crew assisted the Harbor Department and a local landing craft operator with an emergency at the South Harbor launch ramp after a truck got hung up on the landing craft was in danger of sinking. Thanks to a quick response by all, a potential disaster was averted. As everybody has seen, we've got a lot of water. Recent heavy rains have caused numerous flooding problems in town, and many drainages had properly functioning culverts but were simply overwhelmed by the sheer volume of the water that came down. The grading culvert across the back lot of Public Works backed up, and the downhill side of our hill began to scour a bit. The embankment is holding for now, and we're keeping a pretty close eye on it. As a precautionary measure, we have taken all the equipment to the 2nd Street side of the yard in case a washout does occur. The motor pool shop repair design is complete, and we're working to assemble the bid docket package. We anticipate putting this project out to bid within the next month. Parks and Recreation Director recruitment is continuing interviews to be scheduled for some candidates the week at the end of this week, if we can coordinate schedules for everyone. And trying to keep track of the COVID relief bills that are being discussed in Congress. President-elect Biden had a meeting with the board of directors in NACO, and everybody is talking about urging that passage happens. The current bill that's been talked about is a little over $900 million relief bill. Congress is still negotiating with the Senate the current problem with getting an agreement, and their issues are the size of the bill. They really don't like it that it helps state and local governments. They would prefer it just to be outside of that. They really want some version of immunity for businesses getting sued for COVID-related issues. And so all we can go on is what the lobbyist says, which they feel there's very little chance that an extension of the December 30th date will happen. Anything's possible, but there's just an awful lot of discussion going on that's not getting its results as fast as we would like. And that's it. Let's just questions for me.
Any questions of the manager? Member Mucci?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Steve. Hey, there was a report about the Southeast Alaska disaster declaration, I think, late last week. Are we under that? That's some of the stuff that happened.
Sure, we are. Nothing that has happened in Petersburg at this point rises to the level of a disaster, and but we know that we have that potential. It could happen 5 minutes from now. So the governor's disaster declaration does include Petersburg, but we have not reached out to say we need National Guard resources or anything like that. So we know we can do that if, in fact, something bad happens, but so far we have weathered this pretty well.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the manager? Okay.
Yes, I have one.
Okay, Member Tremblay.
Thank you. Steve, I had asked before about the body cam footage policy being developed by the police department. Is that something that's been finalized? And am I out of bounds? Is that part of the public safety board? Just what's the status on that? And are you able to talk about that at all right now?
Sure. I don't know the up-to-the-minute details, but yes, they're working on that policy. I don't believe it has been finalized. We were
it's kind of going back and forth with the attorney, and but the policies I think that we were left with was how to handle the storage of information and releasing it to the public, and so I will try to get more up-to-date information for you and get that back out.
Member Tremblay, the Chief Kerr stepped to the microphone. I believe he has something to add to the discussion.
So currently we're operating under our previous policy, which I can forward to you if you'd like to see it. There are some things that we're currently working with updating. Our current policy is working, but I mean, in all policies there can be better things. In the new one, I specifically address like going into the hospital and stuff like that. All the officers are currently doing what we would recommend if they were to go into a hospital or someplace like that. So it's just clarifying a few things, and like Steve said, I mean, we are going back and forth a little bit, and it's still working, or we're still working on it. I can forward you the current one that we're operating under, though, if you'd like to see it.
Does that answer?
That sounds great. Yeah, thank you. Some of the context is something I hadn't really considered in regards to body cam footage policy was victims' rights. If they're on it and that kind of thing. So I think victims advocacy group involvement at all, has that been a part of the previous policy formation, or is that part of the policy going forward?
Working with victims.
And I guess that can be part of a future discussion. I'd love to see the policy, and I'm just curious about it. Thank you.
And maybe after you review the current policy, it might spur some thought. So with that being said...
Yeah, thank you so much.
Are there any other questions of the manager? 2 hours into the meeting, I would imagine it's probably going to go that many more. Should we take a 5-minute break and reconvene at, let's say, 2:10? Sorry to delay it another 5 minutes, but I need to stretch my legs, and other people have asked to. Assembly members and clerks and everybody are back in the room on this end. Member Kinsinger and Tremblay, are you back online?
Yes, I am.
Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. We're under item 14, unfinished business. Ordinance for second reading. This is ordinance 2020-24, an ordinance adjusting the fiscal year 2021 budget for known changes. I'd entertain a motion to adopt this ordinance in its second reading.
So moved. Second.
Okay, motion's been made by Member Mucci, seconded by Member Lind. And it looks like there are many changes, and I would imagine we need motions for each of these changes. Member Lind?
Yeah. Mr. Mayor, if I could, I think the first four relate to the CARES Act, and if it's okay with the Assembly, I would make those motions all at one time.
Okay, and then I'll read through what those issues would be. Is there a second to that motion?
Sure, I'll second that.
Seconded by Member Mucci. And the four items that we will group into one discussion item are decrease the budget amount for economic support utility subsidy program by $275,000. We didn't have as many applicants as we anticipated, I believe. Item 2, increase the budget amount for economic support local business by $100,000, which will be used to pay back the economic fund for the local business grants totaling $100,000 in last April. Number 3, increase the budget for the use of CARES Act funds to cover payroll for first responders through December 15th, 2020 by $150,000. 4, increase the budget for use of CARES Act funds to cover payroll for the EOC through December 15th of 2020 by $25,000. I think that, does that cover your motion, Member Lynn?
It does, thank you.
Is there discussion on that motion? Member?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had asked the finance director just a couple questions just regarding who is covered under the first responders, and maybe we could just fill that in just a little bit so the folks at home knew what we were talking about.
So sure, the first responders are the police, the fire department, and EMS.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion on this motion to approve this change to the budget? Okay, hearing no input from the assembly, will the clerk call the roll?
Mark?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, that passes unanimously.
I have one more motion to make, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Member Lynn.
Transfer $600,000 from the electrical fund reserves to Blind Slough Capital Project Fund 747 to allow for the negotiation of a project deferment contract that agrees to pricing currently offered by the vendor and states that the start of the work will be delayed and contingent upon obtaining project financing.
I'll second that.
Motion's been made by Member Lynn to approve this transfer of $600,000 from the electrical fund reserves to Blind Slough Capital Project number 747. It's been seconded by Member Mucci. Is there any discussion? Or would anybody want any clarification?
Yeah, could we ask Carl to explain the background behind this particular transfer of funds?
Are you available, Mr. Hagerman?
Yes, I am, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
So, to explain this, COVID has kind of really messed up this project. As the Assembly is aware, Power and Light has been working on improvements to the Blind Slough hydroelectric project for quite some time. We went through the process of doing a conditions assessment, which our engineering team let us know that there were several issues that should really be addressed before the facility fails altogether. No time frame at all of when it might fail, but it got us going on a project to refurbish the project. To that end, we had issued an RFP early on in the year to just procure the equipment for the work, and we did get 5 competitive proposals for that equipment. Unfortunately, COVID-19 did derail and postpone any consideration of a bond election and putting a question to the voters concerning that bond issuance and potential rate increases to repay that bond, just because of the economy, economics right now are not fruitful. The other utilities have also put any rate increase discussions on the back burner until the pandemic is past us. However, so this, I had settled on the decision to put this project on the shelf and had planned on moving in that direction, but in conversations with the engineer, Don Jarrett with McMillan and Jacobs had reminded me out what good pricing that we saw in the proposals and urged another look at this to potentially negotiate with the top-ranked proposer who offered a good price and a good product for the project, and try to arrive at a contract that we could defer the actual equipment procurement. So in other words, we wouldn't have them launch on their engineering effort and manufacturing effort right away. They would hold off until the Borough had squared away the financing end of the project, basically caught up after the pandemic was completed, and was able to move ahead, knowing that not only would we have an equipment procurement contract in place, but we could move towards construction, the installation of that equipment, without worry about the finances being an issue. So where that puts us today is that the proposals that were opened earlier in the year were valid until December 15th, and we're rapidly coming up on that date. We have requested extensions, proposal acceptance period out to February 16th, and that's as of the time of this meeting, 4 of the 5 proposers had agreed to do that. So we can start negotiating with the top-ranked proposer, but the issue and why this is in front of the Assembly today is that in order to award a contract, even if we won't be paying the contractor for any equipment for up to 2 years from now, in order to make an award, the money has to exist in the capital project fund. Right now, the capital project fund is not, the balance is not sufficient to actually make this award. And with the process that is required to increase that capital project fund being a supplemental budget ordinance that takes 3 readings and roughly a month and a half to get to the end of, this is a good opportunity to transfer that money to the capital project fund and set the table for if negotiations are successful and a contract is arrived at, that will be brought back to the Assembly for approval and final award of the equipment procurement contract. If that is all successful, then the award will be able to proceed and not have an issue with inadequate funds in the capital project. As I said, this is not spending money today. It's a transfer from reserves to a capital project fund, and I will be bringing back a contract if we can arrive at one that is acceptable to all parties. I'll be bringing back a contract to the Assembly for final approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hagerman. Does that explain?
It does. Thank you, Carl.
Any other questions of the man, or Mr. Hagerman on this proposed transfer? Okay, we, I think, have addressed the, we'll have the clerk call the roll on this part of the budget change.
Okay. On the second amendment regarding blind slough. Dave?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
And Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, so that passes unanimously as well. Does the clerk feel we need to have a motion to, I mean, we've just addressed everything in the proposed budget change.
I believe we should have them as amended, just to be
I'd entertain a motion to approve the budget, 2021 budget for known changes with the 2 amendments we just voted on.
So moved.
Second.
Motion been made by Member Mucci, seconded by Member Lynn. Discussion. Clerk call the roll.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Okay, so it passes as amended. Next thing on the item is the discussion with Cecilia Tavalero of Alaska Natives Without Land regarding the unrecognized Southeast Alaska Native Communities Recognition and Compensations Act legislation introduced to the U.S. Senate in November. Assembly Member Mucci requested Ms. Tavalero be available for the Assembly to discuss any questions or concerns they may have regarding the unrecognized Southeast Alaska Native Communities Recognition and Compensation Act. And I understand there Ms. Hollingstead and one other person is on the line as well. I would, we will move forward as this is request. I would suggest that we try to do something like this that could be quite lengthy and have specific public comment in a special meeting in the future as this topic comes up again. But Member Mucci, do you have any questions? Or Ms. Celia Tavalero, you may have the floor.
Operator, if you could please unmute Cecilia Tavalero and also Nicole Hollingstad.
Are we going to unmute the third call as well?
The other number, I don't know how we got it.
Oh, okay. So,
And Ms. Hollingstad and Tavalero are open.
Thank you.
Okay, so would you guys like to just give a little overview, or don't particularly have any questions, but if maybe to answer questions that assembly members have, then we'll start off with Mr. Mucci, because he requested this item on the agenda. So welcome to our meeting, and we'll see if we have questions. Mr. Mucci.
Yeah, thank you.
very much.
You're welcome.
Hear that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I put this on, I asked to have this on the agenda like a week and a half ago, and part of the reason for having it on the agenda is, like the mayor said, we sat in on a meeting with Southeast communities who had some concerns about the legislation, and frankly, the meeting that we had here on the Wednesday prior to when the public, I guess, are weighing in on our comments as a community. We did it on a Wednesday, and the comments were due a couple hours after the meeting. And when I left that meeting, I didn't have a real good. I didn't feel well about how things came out, both as my participation in it. And since then, it appears to me that there is a little bit of time to kind of move forward with, a community-wide on what we're looking at in the Petersburg area. I mean, you've heard concerns from people who are talking about they can't see all the land selections on Midcop Island, and there are some concerns about the land selections over at Thomas Bay. And looking at the property viewing app that we have on our website, it's really hard to differentiate where the land selections are and whose property they kind of either come up against. And I think there needs to be some clarification. I know there are lots of questions in the community, and this is probably not the right time to do it, but one of the questions I have, and it doesn't have to be addressed today, is there is some concerns about who and how the lands were selected. We hear about economic development in the community, and I think it would be an interesting conversation to see what this organization's plan is for economic development with some of these lands. I think for me, understanding the organizational structure of the landless organization as it relates to Petersburg, I think would be interesting for me. I think we need to also look at the Bureau of Land Management, Section 17B on their easement rules, and see what that means for access to the lands that we're currently using. And, there's plenty of questions. We don't have to address them all today. I know there's plenty of things to do here, but my original intent for putting this on the agenda was that things would be forward faster than the community was comfortable with. And, I would be certainly happy to have a work session or a special meeting in January. You can get some community feedback and some questions that they might have, and just keep the dialogue open, in a constructive manner, and moving forward. So that's kind of why it's on there at this point. And so, I'd yield the floor to the callers. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Tabaletto, Ms. Hall-Instead, do you have some comments you'd like to make?
Yes, Mayor Mark. Thank you. Mayor Mark Jensen and Assembly, we do have some comments. We can go ahead and get started with answering some questions that we have kept in mind that the Assembly members are interested in knowing the answers to. First of all, I would like to thank you for the time that you are giving us today. And if we do need to go ahead and call another special meeting, that would be fine with us. We want everyone to be on the same page and understanding where we are coming from. And it is, as we have stated in the past, it is good for the whole community. And all of the concerns we are hoping to address either today or in a future meeting. I would like to just point out that folks can see a more detailed map of our Petersburg and all of the other communities' land selections on our website, www.withoutland.org. And Petersburg's maps are under, if you go to campaign, and pull down the menu, go into legislation, and you'll see our detailed maps for what was for the concerned callers earlier. And also another concern was the bill's number changed. Now there are two bills under the Senate side. They are Senate Bill S4889 and S4891. And so if you would like to check in there, you'll get your answers. Also, we had heard in the previous meeting some questions were asked about how the lands were selected, and I would like to invite Nicole to chime in. Also, do we have Todd Antioquia on the line? And he was not unmuted?
I believe he called into the wrong number. Is he online now, Clerk Thompson?
He is on the line and he's unmuted, yes.
He is unmuted.
Oh, great, thank you. Well, I would like to invite my colleagues on this issue to chime in whenever possible to make issues clearer. The first question I'm going to address is how were the lands selected? And over 10 years ago, many of the landless shareholders from Petersburg contributed to the land nomination efforts over the decades, some of which are no longer with us. With the Congress makeup changing so drastically over the years, we had to revisit the maps countless times and make revisions and react to the shrinking availability of lands. Lands were selected for their traditional use, for their spiritual and cultural reasons, for their diverse economic opportunities, and for their accessibility. Now, many of the folks you remember, Dick Cato, Victor Duffy, Mike Lopez, Kurt Lyons, Amy Billingstead, there are a number of folks that have been involved with this all throughout the years. I'd also like to point out, I don't believe any of the other communities that did receive village or urban corporations really just announced that you're going to be making map selections and land nominations, and those folks that were interested showed up. And it's been a process over the years. So if Todd or Nicole would like to address anything regarding those land selections, please do.
They would have the floor if they have comments.
Thank you. This is Nicole Hollingshead. May I take this opportunity?
Yes, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I am born and raised resident of Petersburg. I'm currently living in Anchorage, but I still own property and pay taxes in Petersburg, and it's a pleasure to be able to speak to you today about this effort of Alaska Natives Without Land and to answer some of the more specific questions you have. But like Cecilia, I strongly recommend that there be a separate working session on this so that we can give you the detail and be sure to answer very thoroughly any additional questions you have. I do want to start simply by saying, for those who have called in with concerns and for the Assembly members themselves, we hear you. We hear you. We understand that working towards community solutions necessarily means that there will be questions and there will be concerns, and that we have to have an open dialogue in order to make this effort successful. And to some of the concerns that were raised earlier, if legislation should not proceed simply because there might be contention among community members, well then I'm not sure we'd ever get any policy to move forward. It's this form of public dialogue that we need in order to address those concerns and try to reduce any misunderstandings or misinformation. To the selection of land, it's important to understand that when the Tongass National Forest was formed, there were tens of thousands of tribal members who were forced to make the sacrifice of their indigenous homelands. There was a concern raised earlier about the sacrifice of taxpayers, and it's well worth asking. But I would ask also that those involved in this dialogue understand that these indigenous homelands were removed without recourse for those indigenous
communities, and their community and societal infrastructures were reconfigured with that simple formation of the Tongass Forest. And when it came time to look at the land parcels, there were already over 5 million acres that were designated for wildlife conservation. There were over 7 million acres within the Tongass that were designated for other purposes, for forests and creeks. So when the communities that were left landless were setting out to determine their parcels, the only parcels we had left to choose from were those that were designated for economic development. So it's a little bit of chicken and egg. We did not select these parcels because of timber development. We selected many of these parcels because they were the only land available for selection at that time. And I think that's an important thing to remember and understand. Will Ware spoke very eloquently earlier, but we are no longer living in the reality of timber 1970s or 1980s. That is simply not an economic model that is sustainable. And when we say that we hear your concerns, we hope that we do receive the same respect in return, that how those lands are intended to be used is something that can be open for conversation, but ultimately is the prerogative of the landowner. I would like to also speak very briefly to access and assure all of those listening and those with any future concerns that the Landless Board has unanimously agreed that public access will continue on the lands that are selected. Every acre of the Tongass is precious to somebody, and it's not surprising that some of the selections include U.S. Forest Service cabins or recreation sites. I think what is remarkable to note that of the 155 cabins and over 160 recreational sites, that there aren't more that are included. And we do think there is reasonable recourse to be made for the very few, the 5 or 6 that have found themselves in Petersburg's landless parcel selections. We are here because of our desire to work through the public input and information we've received, and in every case we're committed to working with the Forest Service to resolve specific site access and use issues. We've already asked to meet with delegation staff and the Forest Service to work through several issues related to specific public use sites. With regard to roads and trails, and with regard to public access to roads and trails, the legislation very clearly provides that conveyances of land shall be subject to these public easements, and that the BLM must consult with appropriate state and federal agencies. So again, just to underscore that unlike the original Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, this particular Alaska Natives Without Land bill preserves public access to all of the lands proposed to be conveyed to the new urban corporations. It guarantees in perpetuity that the land shall remain open and available to subsistence uses, non-commercial recreation, hunting and fishing, and other non-commercial recreational uses by the public. So again, we do hear you, and we ask that you hear us, and that we engage in a constructive, solution-oriented dialogue so that this emerges as a win-win piece of legislation for the community of Petersburg. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hollenstead.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. Also, Todd, do you have anything to add? If not, I'll go ahead and move on to the next.
Yeah, I'll invite, thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just finishing up on who made the land selections. We do have a handful of community members, Petersburg citizens, of which even the native stakeholders are members of. They're all Petersburg citizens as well. One of the expert stakeholders across the region, from Alaska to the Forest Service to the conservation community to professional economic development advisors and beyond. and all participated in identifying available lands. And just to be clear, since so much of it is already spoken for, and we've been standing in line and aside for so long, we've got the crumbs to pick from. So that's, in a way, that's how so many communities had to pick farther and farther away from their homeland. So, moving on to the next question, hopefully you have, I think Jeff asked what the organizational structure will look like. Well, it would be like the other 200 village and urban corporations that were formed under the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Each of the 5 communities will receive 1 township of land and stand up a Native Urban Corporation that will be autonomous. The rest of the state had low lands given to them, but because they didn't have the Tlingit and Haida settlement, they were giving us only 1 township. So that's what we have to work with. The shareholders who enrolled in a specific community back in the 70s will elect a board of directors in their shareholder base. And that board will hire a president or CEO or both to build the management and staff capacity to realize the vision of the shareholders and the board of directors. There is no connection to other regional, village, or urban corporations within the new company's governance structure. Does anyone have any input? Todd or Nicole? Okay, the next question. Where does Alaska fit in the organizational structure? The answer is they do not. Each of the 5 new urban corporations will be autonomous and be governed by the shareholder elected board of directors and management hired by the board to realize its vision. I believe there were some questions regarding will Alaska own the subsurface. The answer is yes. Just like the 12 village and urban corporations already recognized at INCSA's inception, subsurface will go to Alaska, as this would be an amendment to INCSA, not a whole new bill. Nicole or Todd?
Thank you, Cecilia. This is Nicole again. I do want to clarify that earlier today there was a statement about urban at-large shareholders. It's important that information be accurate when it comes before communities and the public assembly. There is a difference between urban shareholders and at-large shareholders. At-large shareholders were those who lived outside of the state of Alaska upon enrollment to corporations under INCSA. The 5 communities without land were designated as potential urban corporations. And I just wanted to speak to that Alaska's records have enrolled all of those shareholders in those 5 communities as urban shareholders. And while Alaska, again, would manage subsurface, the structure of a corporation itself would be incorporated and set up under the laws of the state of Alaska and run as its own separate corporate identity within the community of Petersburg. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, another question. The public invested in as well as Forest Service cabins, roads, and LTFs, log transfer facilities that would be on their own lands. How were those handled in the legislation? The Land Board has discussed these sites and is in unanimous agreement that none of our communities supported the selection of these parcels because of the location of the Forest Service recreational facilities. As you know, public recreation sites are found throughout the Tongass, and it is impossible to identify large, continuous blocks of land that do not impact current public recreation areas. The Landless communities do not intend to preclude public access to or use of U.S. Forest Service recreation sites. We have no desire to either remove or take over management of these sites. We appreciate the public input and information we have received as communities have reviewed the proposed legislation and the landless selection. In all cases, we are committed to working with the Forest Service to resolve specific site access and use issues, and we have already asked to meet with delegation staff and the Forest Service to work through issues related to specific public use sites. I would just like to add in there, I don't think Nicole already stated, we are not in a cabin grab, land grab. Like I said, this was a lot of the sites that were chosen many years ago. And also, we don't wish to be in the cabin rental business. Okay, so with regard to roads and trails, in regard to the public access to the roads and trails, the legislation provides that conveyances of land to the new urban corporations, quote, shall be, unquote, subject to the reservation of public easements under Section 17B of the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act. Under Section 17B, the Bureau of Land Management is required to identify public easements across the land selected by Alaska Native corporations, including lands which are reasonably necessary to guarantee a, quote, a full right of public use and access for recreation, including camping, hunting, transportation, utilities, docks, and such other public uses, end quote. BLM must, quote, consult with appropriate state and federal agencies, shall review proposed transportation plans, and shall receive and review statements and recommendations from interested organizations and individuals on the need for and proposed location of public easements, end quote. Section 17B easements are reserved and managed by the federal government. The rights are reserved when the BLM conveys land to an Alaska Native corporation under ANCSA. Further, the legislation, unlike ANCSA, preserves land public access to all the lands conveyed to the new urban corporations, guaranteeing in perpetuity that the land shall, quote, remain open and available to subsistence uses, non-commercial recreational hunting and fishing, and other non-commercial recreational uses by the public, end quote. Again, this was not a requirement under ANCSA. The landless communities asked that this public access be included in the new legislation because we know these lands are used by many people. The legislation also preserves all existing special use permits and provides for the issuance of an additional 10-year special use permit to each permit holder. Additionally, each urban corporation will be able to issue special use permits on their own. The legislation also preserves the right of the Forest Service and its designees to continue to use the roads and LTS and other transportation facilities conveyed with the land to the urban corporations. Several pages of the legislation are devoted to preserving public access, including public access to roads, trails, and to the land. Again, it's impossible for the landless communities to identify lands for conveyance without overlapping areas currently in use by members of the public. It is for this reason that the legislation has been amended to guarantee public access. Nicole or Todd, would you care to add anything?
This is Todd McKay. Thank you. This is Todd Antioch. I'm the campaign and volunteer coordinator for the Alaska Land for that land. And we appreciate yourselves when you distinguish us members for allowing this time with you all. We greatly appreciated you addressing that also in the last regular assembly meeting, as well hosting a work session on November 18th, where we were provided the opportunity to present the legislation. And I just wanted to add to Nicole's comments that Ms. Tabarero provided a written response to a number of comments around these issues related to access, the at-large benefits, and numerous others that were brought up in the public testimony. And with some submitted to the Assembly on November 17th, so the day ahead of the work session, and it has a comprehensive outline and all the factual basis for correcting a number of those portions. So we're happy to move forward that to you, and again, we greatly appreciate the opportunity for future work sessions should they be provided. So thank you.
Thank you, Todd. So if I may continue, we're just about ready to open up for questions from the Assembly as necessary. The next question, what are the next legislative steps? The legislation received a hearing before the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Subcommittee, Public Lands, Forests, and Land. I hope to see a similar hearing in the House, and then for the committees to mark up the bills, deliberate, and then pass them on to the full House and Senate. We would greatly appreciate a Christmas miracle. And like I said, we tend to think of citizens of Petersburg as being one and working together. In this day and age, it would make really prudent sense that we would work together for the common good of all and pool our resources. And I'm hoping that because we're answering questions and being available to answer any questions also, that there would be a development of trust amongst our people who are involved in putting this whole thing together. I want the best outcome for everyone involved. And that means the whole rock with us. So appreciate if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Any questions from the members? Mr. Kinsinger, Member Kinsinger, or Tremblay?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have one question.
Okay.
At a previous meeting, I asked if you were interested in having a covenant placed on this land in regards to logging, that you would abide by federal logging standards and not state logging standards. Is that something that you would entertain, or is that a non-starter from your perspective?
I'm sorry, who is speaking?
That is Dave Kinsinger.
Yes, if you're not hear the question, I'll repeat it again.
No, I heard it. You were talking about abiding by federal logging practices rather than the state?
Yes, specifically in regards to federal logging standards require that all timber be processed in Alaska, and it also has limitations on the streamside buffers. Instead of 50 feet to 100 feet, and it also restricts the size of the clear cuts. That's just a snapshot of those regulations. The state logging regulations basically state that you can pretty much do whatever you want as long as you don't log within 50 feet of a stream. And of course, you don't require any local processes.
Well, first off, I would like to state that, yes, we would like to be abiding by the most stringent any kind of logging, but at this point in time, we don't have any idea of logging any of the proposed land selection for any of the 5 communities. I, of course, can only speak right now specifically for Petersburg, because we do, back in the day when those land selections were being made over 10 years ago, we didn't have any real ideas or plans on logging. However, that's not to say, I don't know, down the road, I don't know. The timber industry is not something that we're interested in. And I'm telling you right now that our young people are very concerned about the carbon imprint on our planet. A lot of people are paying attention to what's going on with the climate change. And so what we would like to see is we'd like to be included, or very, very seriously consider the carbon credit that we would be able to enjoy, like some of the other village and urban corporations are enjoying now. We have ideas on ecotourism, cultural, social benefits, educational benefits for our shareholders, and to be honest with you, I believe there can be a limited amount of logging, even though there are carbon credits in place. But I personally I don't foresee anybody wanting to do that. It doesn't make sense in this day and age. So, carbon credits and limiting our carbon footprint on the planet. We have a lot of young people who are very savvy to all of this and what's going on, and this is going to be their corporation. We are in your communities. We know them, and we respect them in Petersburg, and one of them did call in and speak to just fairly recently. Will Ray has a business in Petersburg, and he's very opinionated, as you've noticed. But we appreciate them calling in and giving support for us. But yes, I believe that it wouldn't be unreasonable for any of the 5 urban corporations to consider the most stringent protections under federal logging practices.
Mr. Mayor, can I ask a follow-up?
Sure. We're into this about an hour.
So my understanding is the answer to your question is yes, that you would not be opposed to a covenant being placed in this legislation to that effect.
Mr. Mayor, do you agree with what you said? Go ahead, Nicole. Yes, I would not want there to be a misunderstanding. The truth is, Dave, this body is working very closely with communities to seek to get this legislation passed. And the legislation has already been drafted and introduced. The folks that you're speaking to now aren't the leadership because that leadership has not yet been created of the 5 urban corporations that are yet to be stood up. It would be their prerogative to enter in those conversations with you. I think what Cecilia is saying is that we understand the question that is underneath your question, and that is, how can we work towards economic development that is in the best interest of our communities and the state of Alaska? And that's a conversation that we all want to have, because that's what we are trying to do in developing opportunities within our own communities. So I think it's important for there in this meeting not to be a misunderstanding that we're saying yes, but to understand that the leadership of those urban corporations, to our knowledge, would be open to having those conversations about how to responsibly use this land asset. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. Todd?
Any other questions?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just add that there has been numerous other Alaska corporations that stewarded their lands very successfully under the state guidelines, and that I really want to emphasize, going back to what both Nicole and Cecilia said, that as Native people and how we steward these small portion of land that have been returned to us, that we have to look at it through the lens of we are the original conservationists. They have values that drive and inform how we would steward these lands in perpetuity. That any sort of economic development or utilization of the land would be through the lens of protecting the waters and the water quality and subsistence and habitat. These are all areas that are precious to us, and that would drive the stewardship values that we maintain in perpetuity. So, thank you.
Member Murchie?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the purpose of the conversation here is to keep the dialogue going. I know this is a very important issue to a lot of people. I guess my original intent here was to, if this legislation was moving forward in a faster pace and everybody was comfortable for, at least have a conversation about it. It seems like we're going to have an opportunity, hopefully in the month of January or so, to have a wide-ranging conversation to answer these questions and have more dialogue. I know there's a lot of stuff left on our agenda here, and I don't mean to cut people off, but I didn't want to go too late here, and I wanted to make sure that Cecilia and Todd and Nicole had an opportunity to chat and let us know some of their concerns and answer some of the questions. But I think, we could probably do it for another hour easy on answering all the questions that the community has. And I'm just wondering if we could hopefully wrap it up maybe on one end. And
I don't know how much more Celia and her people have to talk about. I don't know if you have answers to more questions that you felt were asked of you, but like I said before we started this, I think this is going to be a conversation we will have more of in the future, and I think the public needs to be involved in all of it. Besides just the Assembly and the representatives from the Landless Coalition. I would like to see representatives from, congressional people and people from other communities. This is a region-wide issue, and I wish these discussions would have been had way prior to this bill getting to this point. But here we are, and we'll see where it progresses from here. I understand. I know it's been introduced in the Senate, not in the House yet. So, but we'll see. Do you guys have any other comments that you would like to make, Celia or Todd or Nicole?
No, I don't. Other than
you were both.
I'm sorry, Cecilia, if I may. Yes, I'd simply like to make one comment before ceding the floor to Cecilia for closing, and that is that when the work of the Alaskan Natives Without Land group submitted its testimony, we did so along with 352 individual letters of support and over 1,300 letters of support from organizations, assemblies, councils, agencies, other interested groups.
Are you still there? Did we lose?
Hello, Nicole?
Looks like she got cut off.
Nicole has been dropped from the call, so until she gets back. Celia, you have comments, or Todd?
Mr. Mayor, just a couple of quick points. You mentioned that the bill had not been introduced in the House. Actually, there was a companion bill introduced in the House 2 days after the Senate bill was introduced. It's House bill. It's H.R. 8751 with the same language 50% of bill. So just for clarification there.
Okay.
And just as it relates to...
What was the number of that bill? We have it written down. Sorry, Todd.
Okay, HR 8751. Also, just again, I wanted to extend my appreciation for the continued dialogue. We were able to come before this assembly such as a year ago as Sustainable embarked on the Alaska Natives Without Land efforts to build awareness about the pending legislation. The Petersburg Assembly, they know that you were the first to post to the website the draft legislation, the maps with the proposed land nominations, I think as far back as about 3 months ago. So we really appreciated your efforts to build both public awareness as well as public comment. And I know many of the other communities have been following suit, but this has been a continued concerted effort across the region, across the state, and even down into the Pacific Northwest for more than a year now. So thank you so much for your leadership and for inviting the dialogue.
Yeah, thank you. Is Nicole back on, or Celia? If not, go ahead, Ms. Tatlow.
Yes, I'm here. I would just like to thank you, Mr. Mayor, and also Assembly Member Jeff Mucci for providing this opportunity to provide a little bit more clarification on our efforts. And like I stated earlier, we look to be good neighbors, and we look to benefit the whole community, not just the Vancouver shareholders, however that is the main concern, but all of the citizens of each of these communities, because that's how it is within the rest of the state. All those communities that do have corporations, we're not stuck with corporations. This is the model that we are working with. So we're trying to make the best of it, and hopefully, with the additional input and guidance and recommendations from our non-shareholder neighbors, it'll turn out to be something that's very good for the long term. A lot of the environmental community at Tony Futures Roundtable meetings in the past used to say that we want healthy and vibrant communities. Well, we do too. And I believe is one of the ways of doing that. So we'd just like to thank you for your time. I look forward to continuing dialogue and clarifying some other concerns that any of the members of the community may have. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Have a nice Christmas.
All right, you too. Nicole, she isn't back, or she is back? Yes. Do you have any last minute thoughts, Nicole, since you were dropped from the call?
Thank you for the kindness of asking. I was simply emphasizing the amount of outreach and support that is already behind this effort, and I apologize for the cut, but believe that concept has been conveyed. Thank you so much, and happy holidays.
You too. Thank you very much. Okay, that brings us to item 15 on today's agenda, new business. First item A is the assignment of lease Marvin Incorporated to Rockies Marine Incorporated. I'd entertain a motion to approve this reassignment.
So moved. Second.
Motion been made by Member Lynn, seconded by Member Mucci. And I mentioned this before, I forget where it was, but I read Bert Winter's name in it, that I believe is the dock, and I would like maps on, if it's possible, of the, so it's easy just to look and you pick out the parcel and you know what you're talking about.
In the future?
In the future, yeah.
Yes, sir.
But is there any discussion on this?
I'm in favor of it, but I just have a comment that looking at the lease, and I looked at several others, I've got received some of the public comments that I really think we need a clause in our leases that requires these people that we lease to operate the facilities. And if after a certain period of time, say 6 months or 1 year, what have you, if there is not, just not being operated, then it reverts back to the borough and it can then be issued. Because our purpose is to keep things in operation and to keep the businesses flowing in town. I'd really like to see some kind of a lease to that, or some kind of a clause, as we begin to renew these things and make changes that we put into our leases. Thank you.
Any other input on this lease assignment? Okay, will the clerk call the roll?
Jeff?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Kelsey?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes. Next item under new business, item B, memorandum of agreement with Petersburg Medical Center to provide asymptomatic COVID testing for borough employees working at Mountain View Manor Assisted Living Facility. I entertain a motion to approve this.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Mucci, seconded by Member Lim. Discussion.
Mr. Mayor.
Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to hear from Phil from the medical center, the CEO of the medical center, just kind of explaining what he's hoping to accomplish here. Thank you.
Okay, normally in this part, when we're deliberating as an assembly, we don't have input, but on this case we will. But in the future, I'd like to have all the comments put forward in visitors' views related to the agenda or some report of officers, so we don't have a back and forth dialogue at this point in the meeting. So, Mr. Hofstetter, can you answer Member Mucci's question?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, a little background is, we just provided from our incident command group at the hospital a recommendation through myself and Dr. Heyer and a few others to consider testing staff on a regular or routine basis for surveillance of COVID. And there was some back and forth exchange with the manager, myself, with Sheilyn, and I basically offered just free testing, just as a safety, just to get things moving, and the result of that was this MOA. I'm not familiar with all the reasoning or the requirements or the why it's on the agenda necessarily. It was just an offer as a recommendation to support testing, and so that's where we are. The MOA just reflects simply our support in that testing, and that we would be willing to do that for the manor.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Member Kinsinger or Member Tremblay, do you have any questions of Mr. Hofstadter while he's on the line?
Yes, I have one that if you could address at a future meeting. It's been brought up by several people that have, I'm totally confused on the number of cycles on the testing and what exactly that means. If it's at the next meeting, or at some point in the future you could address that. It would at least help me and clarify what type of testing we're doing in town. And my only other general comment on this is I think it's very important that everybody get tested. I understand the controversy that's involved in that, and I don't know, I would like to see perhaps at this point with the opposition that is expressed by the members, or by the employees, that I'm going to support that we just recommend that they be tested, not make it mandatory. So I guess the question I'd like to ask, and I don't know whether Phil's the appropriate person, at what point would we require testing of the employees? When we have an outbreak in town, or when we have actual residents at the manor sick with the employees? At that point, would they feel it would be appropriate to be tested?
I can.
Go ahead, Mr. Hofstadter.
Yeah, I can partially answer some of that. As far as when it's appropriate, that's really that's something that should be defined in a mitigation strategy for the manor. So it really is up to the manor, and also bringing that up as a recommendation to the Borough IC would also be a possible track to help answer that question. The idea is really to do surveillance and prevent that from happening. Once we're in a community outbreak, it's really very difficult to manage those situations in the moment. And to speak on the testing a little bit, I believe some of the comments are, and this is why I recommended the community looking and listening to the echo call, is because that comment is from PCR test is a bit twisted. It's, I'm not a pathologist. I certainly can get our lab pathologist on if that's what's desired. But basically, PCR testing is looking at genetic material, and I believe what's being referenced is a comment that, dead virus can be detected in individuals who have had COVID, and then there's some conclusion that that's overly sensitive. It is certainly not a false positive by any means. However, it's a twisted conclusion in my opinion. But again, I can certainly get an expert, our pathologist, on the line. Our lab director also addressed this at the last KFSK call. So we will try to do everything we can to support education for the community, and including don't believe us, call listen in on the echo call at the state with the epidemiologies.
So, Mr. Hofstadter, in regards to Member Kinsinger's question, I would be appreciated if you could just send a brief explanation of the cycles and the from 15 cycles to 40 cycles and what the probability of accuracy is, that would be nice, but I don't know that we need to discuss that now, but it'd be nice to have that information. Thank you. Any other questions, Member Kinsinger? Or did that answer your question? Or
Mr. Mayor, may I chime in?
Yes, I believe so.
That's it? We have Sheila Bell that would like to make a comment.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the fact that not only is this not recommended by our state licensing, but it's not required at all under our state. Again, we are a home. We're doing the best we can, and we're going over and above. In fact, he said that it would be more harmful to probably do it because the false positives, he said, were not only possible, but they are probable. It turns everybody upside down in that. And the biggest fear for us, too, the document that Teresa Phillips read for you guys earlier, out of 23 employees, 18 of them signed that, so that pretty much guarantees I might lose up to 1/3 of my staff, which would be way more detrimental. And so if we could just not do it, keep it voluntary, that's the best thing. I try to get them rallied up to do it. There's people that sign up once in a while, like I had reported earlier, but other than that, there's been no hospitalizations. We've had no COVID in our facility. There's been no spread in town. It's not required by the state. Just if we could just continue being diligent, like my licensing guy, expressed to us just what we're doing. He says, you're doing a good job. And when I talked to the assisted living homes around the state, they were not interested. I mean, they didn't do it. Just the one skilled nursing facility that was mandated by the federal government to do asymptomatic testing, that's the only one that did it. And she said if she could choose not to do it, she wouldn't do it because they're the ones that had the 6 different people, staff members, testing positive for COVID with no spread. And it was just a nightmare. But everybody else is it's all voluntary, anybody else I talked to in the state. And that was southeast and up north out of Anchorage.
Okay, thank you for reiterating your comments from earlier. Member Mucci, you have a question?
Yeah, and a comment, Mr. Mayor. I understand that people feel differently about this, but, one of the statements that you made is that somebody that you rely on for guidance, I don't know if it's but he mentioned taking every precaution possible. For me, I don't view this as a mandate. It says to me that this is an understanding that if people want to be tested up at Mountain View Manor, that they can be, And, I understand, and I've told you many times that, I think Mountain View Manor does a great job. It's one of my favorite buildings in town. If my mother or father was living up there, I'd want to make sure that they were protected as much as possible. I don't want to get lost in the weeds here, but I am just trying to understand how to keep things open. The senior citizens in this community are the most vulnerable, as well as the children. Like everybody else, I take this really very seriously. I think we get lost in this cycle, that cycle. But as far as I can tell, this is just the opportunity for people to be tested if they want. I mean, if people don't really want to be tested of the protocols that we have in place, I mean, they have opportunities to do things. If people don't like the masking mandates that certain businesses have in town, they have options to do things. I mean, I know it's a very specified field up there, but I think for me, I understand their personal needs for the individuals up there, but for me, I look at this stuff as trying to keep the seniors in this community as safe as possible. And as I have in the past, I'm going to err on the recommendation from the medical professionals, and I am going to be voting for this memorandum of agreement with the borough. So thank you. I appreciate your time.
Member Lynn?
To me, there's 2 issues on the table here. One issue is approval of the memorandum with the hospital, which would provide for testing. The other issue on the table, which is to me is not part of that, is whether or not we are going to require testing at the manor. And the 2 of them might not fall together in my mind. And so I guess where I'm at is that I would move that we make it I'm not in favor of mandatory testing at all. That if we're going to do it, I would move that we do it it could be done on a voluntary basis, and that the manager right now has a decision of whether or not he wants to require testing there. That's under the emergency ordinance. The other part of that is I'd also think that it could be moved into Carl's plan as to whether it goes from that to mandatory at some time, but not required at this point to be mandatory.
The way I read this memorandum of agreement is it is going to be mandatory. They just have to figure out a schedule if we approve this. Am I correct in assuming that? So it's just a matter of how many times they'll be tested and what frequency.
Mr. Mayor, that's the way I understand it to be as well.
Hold on a second, Member Trimbley, and I'll recognize you. So I've kind of, I understand both sides of the story, and this being required of the employees at Mountain View Manor, I will not support that, so I will not be voting for this memorandum of agreement. Another point I wanted to make, and I know the Assembly and our ordinance that we passed, 2019 or whatever, decisions have to come before the Assembly. In my mind, this decision could have been made from the administration to our manager without getting us involved in this dialogue. But here we are, so that's my position on it, and I suppose we could amend this back and forth and make it acceptable to one side of the story and not to the other side of the story, and we're just going to be right back to where we were. I think what we've got going on now with get tested if you need to at Mountain View Manor. Clerk Thompson, you have your hand up for clarification?
Yes, thank you. So I just read through the memorandum of agreement again. I don't necessarily see in the MOA where it says that it's going to be mandatory testing.
Right.
It just says that PMC will provide the staffing, the equipment, and all the stuff to do the testing. It says that we'll do it at no charge. It says that the testing will be located up at the Mountain View Manor facility. And it says that the parties will agree upon the frequency and that the borough shall provide PMC an employee scheduling notice each week. So I'm thinking that there would be like a sign-up sheet or something. And but Sheila also has comments. So anyway, the way I read the MOA, me anyway, unless Steve disagrees, this is not mandatory. It's just an MOA between the hospital and the borough to provide asymptomatic testing.
Well, then that's why are we having this discussion? I mean, in my opinion. Hold on, we have...
If I may answer that, Mayor.
Sure.
This is Steve. Could I answer that question?
You sure can.
Sure. Our attorney feels, thank you. Our attorney feels that any contract must be approved by the Assembly. And this MOA is viewed as a contract. So I'm not authorized to approve it without the Assembly weighing in.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. And
yes, sir.
And this is okay, Sheila.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that PMC is already providing all of our asymptomatic testing. Anytime somebody signs their name up on my desk where it's been since March for voluntary testing, they write their name down, we set it up, and they go to PMC. It is better for them to go to PMC, like my licensing specialist said. The more traffic you have coming from a hospital to an assisted living, the more likely you are to contract COVID. And we already have PT and OT, and it would just be another... I mean, if we can just continue doing what we've been doing, and I appreciate PMC supplying that, but where else would I go, honestly, for the testing?
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Member Tremblay, you had a comment?
I did, thank you. So some of my questions were answered by Clerk Thompson, because I agree, I've been confused about why people were calling in and talking about this as a mandate. The only thing I see is the parties will agree upon the frequency of testing of employees, and as we're hearing, there's already there's many opinions about that frequency and which employees will be a part of it already in part of the discussion. I'm not seeing any language
in this MOA that does create a mandate. And I do think that it's important to bring the testing option to the facility because that makes it more convenient. I think people will be more likely to want to get tested if it's one less extra errand to run than, somebody's in the designated area. And I have full faith that PMC staff would take all necessary precautions to prevent spread in the facility. That's why we're all here, right? I have to admit this really weighed on me heavily the last week or so. I can't help but think about the residents there who are in our community's care through the hard work of the employees up at the manor, and how we as a community really owe it to them to do absolutely everything we can to prevent spread from their living facility, and I see this as a step closer to that. And I thank the employees for all that they're doing. I do hope that it would be nice if the mitigation plan, and I'm assuming the manor has a stringent one already put together, would have, say there was widespread community COVID present, that would mean more people would be willing to get tested. I hope, again, that's not a mandate as a part of this. It would just be my hope that people would see the logic in doing that because of just how devastating this could be to our island, especially given the state of the virus in the state. So I guess I'll be voting for this. I don't, partly because there is no, what I see, mandate in any of this. It's simply making it easier and more accessible for the employees who do want to be tested. And I think that it's important. I actually see this entire conversation as, frankly, a symptom of the larger failed response to COVID in this country. If we had had regular asymptomatic testing for everyone from the get, as quickly as possible. We're just now getting to that stage as a country, and that I think is why we're in a nationwide spiral where we're losing 3,000 people a day to a preventable virus. And it's just that we've numbed ourselves to mass preventable death as a country, and it's heartbreaking, and it's troubling to see, and the fact that we basically need to have a second version of scientific fact-checking for every summer meeting now, because we have an hour of unvetted, unchallenged testimony from people that we as assembly members are not, we are not experts in those fields. It is not our responsibility to be countering those, and it's people calling in because they know that they can't be challenged by us the way that they are in the annual or the weekly KFSK updates. It's really frustrating to me, and so I'll be voting for this, and I hope employees take advantage of it. I hope that this makes it easier for them because, like I said, my grandmother is in a facility now in Mercer Island, and if she were in this facility, I would hope that the people taking care of her would understand how important it is to go above and beyond to keep that virus from her, because she's worth protecting, and I know that they know that, and I'm grateful for all the work that they already do for our residents, and I know that it's appreciated by everyone, so thank you.
Member Mute, you have another comment? And we need to...
Just a question, Mr. Mayor. For Steve, I guess. Steve, do we have a mandatory random drug testing program for borough employees?
Only if they're on a DOT safety, so commercial driver's license.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we're going to have to... Okay, Sheila, I'll give you one more...
Okay, just really quick, I wanted to say logistically, for the PMC staff to come and do testing at our facility would be a nightmare, just because we have 3 different shifts. We have 3 different employees. We only have some people working some days. It would be much easier for a PMC who's listening, for us just to go down and be doing what we've done this whole entire time for the voluntary testing.
Thank you. Any other comments from assembly members? And I've been reading through this. I'd have to read through it again. I looked through it yesterday a couple times about the scheduling of the testing? Is it once a week or sooner or quicker? If it's so, I'm reading that into that if the level alert in town is going to determine how many tests the Petersburg Medical Center thinks Mountain View Manor residents should have. And maybe I'm misreading that, but yeah, I don't see the word mandate, but I see in the dialogue it's heavily recommended by EOC and PMC.
As long as it's voluntary.
Pardon me?
As long as it's voluntary, it would be up to the person when they write their name on the...
And that's the way it is currently right now.
Correct.
It's up from the testimony from Mr. Hofstadter earlier, that it's offered to employees at Mountain View Manor, correct?
Not a specific weekly, bi-weekly. That could be an encouragement or a recommendation, but it would not be a mandate.
So
I'm
I don't think this is clear enough, at least to me, to support it. Member Mucci, one more comment.
Yeah, so there is nothing in here that says mandatory. This is all, if you want to go have a COVID test, you sign up and they will come up and they'll stick that thing in your nose and you'll walk away. There's nothing in here that says it's mandated. I mean, I have no idea where the conversation started that, that we're going to make every employee of Mountain View Manor get a swab if they don't want one. There's nothing in here. I mean, I've looked at it till my eyes bleed, and I can't find it. I mean, and for people to make assumptions, I appreciate people calling in and stuff, but, when they say that this is just one step of mandating something and then the schools are going to mandate it, there's nothing in the document that we're talking about right now that says you have to get tested if you work at Mountain View Manor.
If you're going to set up for staff to be tested once per week on a certain day, the underlying tone was mandatory.
So this isn't clear enough for me to support. That's my last comment on this. We could, go back and forth on this for quite some time, I think, without coming to a consensus of what it looks like to me. Is there any other assembly comments on this? So I would hope if this does pass that it just ends up being a voluntary thing, and if people at Mountain View Manor, employees at Mountain View Manor don't feel like signing up to get tested for this weekly schedule or whatever they determine is necessary, that there's no ramifications from it. Remember, Lynn?
Yeah, I'm going to vote no also because I don't think it's clear enough. We've rambled around here quite a bit and with different views. If we're going to do something, I'd like to see a very clear plan of what the intent is and why.
So maybe we'll see how the vote goes. And is there any other comments before I ask the clerk to call the roll? Clerk, call the roll.
Bob?
No.
Jeff?
Yes.
Mark?
No.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Dave?
So it fails with a 3-2 vote without having a full assembly. So next item on the agenda is authorization for Manager Giesbrecht to approve preparation of a scoping document regarding the final aquatic center repairs and other improvements to the pool for an amount not to exceed $50,000. Manager Giesbrecht is requesting authorization to spend an amount not to exceed $50,000 to hire Morris Engineering Group to prepare a scoping document that will outline the specific recommendations for each of the following areas with estimated costs. The borough's insurance will pay a portion of the scoping document costs, with the rest being the borough's responsibility. So anyway, I'd entertain a motion to authorize Mr. Giesbrecht to prepare the scoping document.
So moved.
Second.
Motion been made by Member Mucci, seconded by Member Lynn. Is there any discussion? Clerk, call the roll.
Mark?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Bob?
Yes.
Okay, and Manager Giesbrecht is authorized to move forward with that scoping document. Next item on the agenda is a letter of appreciation to Southeast Alaska Power Agency. Member Lem requests approval of the attached letter and basically appreciates appreciation to SEPA for their quick response to replace the broken submarine cable on the south end of the island. So I'd entertain a motion to approve sending this appreciation letter to SEPA.
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made by Member Mucci, seconded by Member Lind. If someone would like to read the letter, we can, but otherwise it just goes over and talks about how fast SEPA responded to this, and it looks like we're still going to be moving ahead in the spring, Member Lind?
Yeah, if I might make just a couple comments on this, is that this is really for folks in Petersburg. This is really a big deal because if our current submarine cable now fails, we are totally on diesel power, and as it says in the letter, our rates go from about 6.8 cents to about 18 cents a kilowatt hour, and in addition to that, there will be a surcharge on top of that for diesel fuel. It's a big deal for us. So, and I can, without wasting a lot of time, the staff of SEPA did an incredible job, and I think all the members between Tor Benson, Robert Larson, and Carl and myself will tell you that they did an incredible job of doing this because this hasn't been done. That cable's 30 years old and hasn't been done before. The amount of work went into this was just incredible, and the negotiations. The bid that we first came in was $14.2 million. And they got it down to 11, I think it's 11.7. Significant work on it. So with that, I'll stop, but I'm much in favor of this. I think it's needed.
Okay, any other comments on this letter? With appreciation of SEPA, will the clerk call the roll?
Bob?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Chelsea?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Okay, we will be sending that letter. Next item is Planning Commission vacancy letter of interest. Like I mentioned earlier in the mayor's report, Jim Floyd has submitted a letter of interest to fill one of the 2 vacant seats on the Planning Commission until October 21st, October 2021 municipal election. There's a letter of interest from Member Floyd. He's been a member, he was on the Planning Commission in the lower 48, and he would have put his name on the ballot, but he just became a resident. So without any opposition, I would appoint Jim Floyd to the Planning and Zoning Commission. Hearing no opposition, thank you, Mr. Floyd, for putting your name in. Okay, communications. We have numerous communications that are listed on the Borough website. They're on our agenda packet today, so please don't feel like you haven't been heard. If you want your letter or your points in your letter heard at the meeting, you need to call in. Okay, assembly discussion items. Requested public meeting regarding the Cake Access Road. Assemblymember Mucci requested this discussion item. So, Member Mucci, you have comments?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had this on here before we received the letter from Senator Stedman's office regarding the letter that we had. I don't think we've all had or the community's had a chance to kind of look at it and see. So I was just curious where it was in the process, and we got the letter, and so we'll just see if somebody wants to put it on there at a later date. But that was the reason it was on there.
Okay, Clerk Thompson, will this letter from Senator Stedman be included in communications on our next agenda?
Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you. So that will be there for the public to read if they're interested. Next item on the agenda, item B under Assembly discussions, conflict of interest. This was also asked to be put on the meeting agenda by Member Mucci. Go ahead, Member Mucci.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, the only reason I have this on here is Assemblymember Norheim and I had a discussion about conflicts of interest and how they pertain to assembly members, and I'm much more clear on how the conflicts of interest work. I think we need to be careful, or I need to be careful when I'm talking about whether or not I'm a member of this organization or not. We've been talking about supporting the landless organization. We've been talking about possibly funding CARES Act money towards commercial fishing groups, and I just want to make sure that the community knows that we're very aware of how the conflict of interest rules pertain to us, and this just helps clarify it for me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Member Mutual. Are there any other questions or input on this? I brought this to the clerk's attention before the first discussion about the landless natives and Member Norheim potentially having a conflict of interest, and he didn't think he was, and he talked to the attorney, but then after the meeting he figured that he might have had a conflict of interest. So the next meeting, if he's here and he would like to participate, or next time we have this discussion, he'll have to ask to recuse himself, but if the Assembly wants him to be involved, then we vote to let him be involved in the discussion. That brings us to Assembly member comments. Are there any comments on any topic by Assembly members? Member Mucci.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have two. One, today is December 7th, when the U.S. entered World War II. My father-in-law served in the Pacific. Let's take a moment to recognize those individuals who served in the Second World War. The other one is the letters that we get to the assemblies on the Mondays before the meetings. If you're expecting a response from me to a letter that you send me Monday morning for a meeting that I'm supposed to participate in Monday, it's really difficult for me to read your letter, understand what you're trying to get to, and respond to you and your concerns. I know sometimes people aren't paying attention to what's going on in the agenda, but it would be really helpful if people were addressing or sending letters to me on the weekends or something, just so I had a chance. Monday morning, I keep telling people it's not a good time to get me to carry any water for you. I'm just hoping that, I'm able to respond to the public when they send us letters. So that's helpful to me. Thank you.
Any other Assembly members have comments they would like to interject at this time?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Member Tremblay.
Thank you. This is in regards to the topic of COVID, the larger topic that we had many people call in to speak about today. And I wanted to bring two names into the conversation. Joe Xavier was 37 years old in Pilot Station, Alaska. One day after his symptoms began, he was blue from the lack of oxygen because of his COVID diagnosis. He was unable to make it to the hospital. His blood oxygen levels reached 38% by the time he arrived at the clinic, and he died waiting for the medevac. He was 37 years old. Erica Becerra from Los Angeles was 33 years old, and she was 8 months pregnant when diagnosed with COVID in November. Her labor was induced November 15th, but she was unable to hold her son because she couldn't breathe. She was placed on a ventilator before dying of COVID. And I just wanted to bring those names into this conversation because we get a lot of minimization of this virus. I think because we are uncomfortable with living with the reality of what is happening, and I recognize it. It's challenging. It's a challenging time in a lot of ways. But I think it's also important that we keep some context. And so on that note, I would really recommend people read a book called Pale Rider by Laura Spinney. It's about the Great Flu and the misnamed Spanish flu and the multi-years of waves of really devastation that it brought to the world, and what a different time that we're in right now that we get to marvel in the fact information can travel faster than the virus at this point, and we have the ability to use that information to respond accordingly, keep each other safe, and also enjoy life while we're all here. And so I'd encourage folks to read that book and get context, including why survival rates is not actually the end of the conversation. A really high percentage of people who survive COVID are dealing with potentially, we don't even know, lifelong chronic health issues from COVID. And so I would encourage people to help each other stay safe this season by following EOC recommendations, to be the helper that you ask your children to look for in times of crisis. And whatever that means for you, please do it, because we need as much light in this world as possible. As we get closer to solstice, that means it's up to us to make it. So, thank you.
Any other Assembly member comments? Are there any recognitions? Seeing none. That brings us to item 18 on the agenda, and it's an executive session to have Manager Giesbrecht and Clerk Thompson, I believe, give us an overview and look for Assembly direction on PMEA negotiations. And before we go into executive session, I know this has happened once in the past, and just with the COVID issue, we're allowing people to call in to executive sessions, but before our policy was not to. So during this executive session, please be in the room by yourself on your end. So with that being said, I'd entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss the PMEA negotiations.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, perfect. We'll take a short break, and then we will call in on a different number, Debbie, or are we going to...
I have emailed them the number to call into.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to hang up on this call then?